We've evolved right alongside plants as our food and our medicine. These amazing green allies have been in existence for longer than we have. In fact, we would not be here without them. This ancient dependence on plants offers us valuable health benefits today. The use of plants as medicine has been passed down through the centuries. These herbal traditions have remained the same for millennium. Knowledge of this empirical use is far more powerful than just a short time span of laboratory testing. The World Health Organization states that more than 80% of people on Earth use herbal medicine as their primary form of medicine. For many cultures, this tradition is continued uninterrupted. Here in the United States, herbal healing was pushed into the background, taking a back seat beginning in the 1940s to the economics of modern medicine. Fortunately, it made a resurgence in the 1980s and continues to grow in popularity every day, and for good reason. Herbs are readily available to everyone. Herbs are also plentiful. There are over 2,000 medicinal plants available to us. However, knowing just 25 or so plants is highly empowering. Herbs are safe, easy to use, inexpensive, and very effective. Herbs are people's medicine. This course is offered as an overview into this amazing form of healing. We cover the basic philosophy of herbalism and learn how to make several different types of preparations. We'll also cover safety, quality and proper storage, ethical harvesting, and use. So let's get started. Herbs are empowering medicine. They're not only useful for when we're sick or hurt, but they also enhance energy, health, and vitality. Ultimately, health is not just the absence of disease, it's a positive state physically, mentally, and spiritually. Herbs really shine in this area for everyday, radiant well-being. Plants really strengthen and tone the system and bodily organs. They're holistic, treating the whole body. We have to make sure that herbs are not just viewed as a replacement for modern medicine. Herbalism loses its purpose in that context and application. Herbs are at their best when they're used preventatively, interactively, and even as everyday food and beverage. There's an old saying that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Herbalism also looks at the patterns of an illness and gets to the source of the issue and prevents problems from reappearing, rather than simply just masking the symptoms and healing on a more superficial level. It's important to keep in mind that both herbalism and modern medicine both have value. There is no one best system or an either-or situation. If properly understood, the two modalities of healing can actually complement one another. There are times when modern, or what we call allopathic medicine, is more appropriate, and times when herbology is a better choice, and times when both can be used together or at different times during an illness. A good example would be Lyme disease. At the onset of a disease, it's important to take really strong antibiotics such as doxycycline. But you'll want to use supportive herbs during the course of that medication. For example, you may want to support the intestinal mucosa with something like slippery elm or marshmallow, which are wonderful herbs to use. And once the medication is discontinued, it's really important to support the liver and kidneys with herbal remedies to avoid any side issues. Nettles would be a wonderful example of a good herb to use during this time. So hopefully this example gives you a sense of when to use modern medicine and when to use herbal medicine and when they can be used together or at different stages of an illness. Science is more and more frequently playing a role in herbal medicine. Scientific research, however, is often based on single constituents. But plants are really best used in their whole plant state. All of the compounds are contained in the plants and work harmoniously together, just as our own bodies work synergistically rather than functioning as individual dissected parts. That being said, science has made many contributions to the field of herbalism and can add a rich understanding of how and why the plants work so well as medicine. I would also like to mention that there's a balance between studying the latest scientific research and spending time with the plants. Both have great value, and no matter whether you're more inclined one way or another, you simply cannot ignore the other. I spend a great deal of time with the plants, growing them, harvesting them in the wild, taking students on plant walks, working as an herbalist, and simply reconnecting at the deepest level when I'm in the forest. So make sure to make a visit to where the plants grow. Next, we're going to dive into the really fun part of the course, which is actually making some medicinal preparations. You'll find that this is much easier than you think. We will talk a little bit about some of the medicinal plants along the way, but we won't be going into very much depth about those at all. Otherwise, we would never have time to get to the actual learning how to make medicine. When you're first learning how, just start out in small batches in case things don't turn out quite the way you thought. Also, know why you're using each ingredient and what it's doing in the formulas. I think you should have some really great success, and if you have any questions along the way, certainly reach out to let me know.
Tinctures are highly concentrated liquid extracts of herbs. They're one of the most popular ways to take herbal medicine, and for many good reasons. First of all, they're very easy to take. You can simply put them into a dropper bottle such as this and put some drops under the tongue, or you can put the tinctures into some sort of liquid such as water or tea or juice. Tinctures also get into the bloodstream very quickly. So, this is very good for acute situations, something that is happening right now. However, tinctures are also often used and very good for more long term chronic situations. Tinctures are also much easier to store than bulk dried herbs, which take up a lot more space. These are very small and concentrated and can be stored in many different places in your house or in your apothecary in a much smaller space. They also last for a very long time, especially if stored properly. So you want to make sure that they are stored in jars with tight sealed lids to keep the oxygen from getting at them. And also store them someplace away from light, whether it's sunlight or the interior lights. You just want to make sure that they're in a dark location and also a cool location. So store them away from any source of heat. And this will really help preserve your tinctures. Also, I like to, as I use the tincture, put them into smaller and smaller bottles. That also reduces the amount of contact with the oxygen. Herbs in tincture form can last for 2 to 3 years and probably even longer than that as long as they are stored properly. Tinctures are also wonderful for first aid kits, whether it's your travel kit. They're very easy to take with you. You can simply put them in your purse and take them with you. Tinctures can be fairly expensive to purchase, but very inexpensive if you make your own, and it will last for quite a long time. They're very simple to make. There are really only two ingredients to make a tincture. The first one is the menstruum, which is the solvent used to extract the medicinal qualities of the plant. It's made by steeping the herbs in the menstruum and infusing to release those medicinal constituents. The second ingredient, of course, is the herbs. There are different types of menstruums and different ways of extracting the medicinal compounds from plants. The most popular way to make tinctures is with alcohol. It is used alongside water to extract those medicinal compounds and is one of the best ways to make your tinctures for a few different reasons. First of all, it is the most potent and extracts the most amount of compounds. And it is also very quick acting and readily assimilated into the system. It is also one of the best preservatives. So your alcohol tinctures will last for longer than any of the other ways of making tinctures, such as the acetas or the vinegar extracts, which we'll be talking about in a moment. The alcohol, when you buy it, comes as 100 proof or 80 proof, is what you'll most often see. And what that means is the alcohol is already combined with the water in the bottle. So 100 proof means that it is 50% water and 50% alcohol. You might see 80 proof as well, which means that is 40% alcohol and 60% water. The higher the proof, usually the better, but if you can only find 80 proof, that is just fine. You can use a number of different types of alcohol. Traditionally, it was brandy that was used for most tinctures, but a lot of people actually do like to use vodka. It seems to be a little bit lighter, and this brand Tito's is actually gluten free. Some people actually do even use gin as well. So you can choose which type of alcohol that you want to use for your tincture. Glycerin is another menstruum that you can use to extract the herbal constituents from plants to make your tinctures. Glycerin tinctures are called glycerites. They're wonderful for children or those that are sensitive to alcohol. They are not quite as strong as the alcohol tinctures, but they still have wonderful medicinal value. They're very good tasting, a bit sweet, and they're also very moistening to the system and high in nutrition. So it would be good to use glycerin if you want to make those tinctures that are for high nutrients. But you can use them for any number of different purposes. You want to make sure that you're going to be using fresh herbs for your glycerites. So you either have to purchase them fresh or wildcraft or harvest your own herbs for making the glycerites. As with alcohol tinctures, you can use fresh or dried, but be sure to use fresh with the glycerin. They do not preserve quite as long as the alcohol tinctures. So the glycerites will last for about 1 year if stored well, which is tightly capped in a cool, dry place. Vinegar can also be used to make your tinctures. It is called an aceta. And similar to the glycerites, the acetas are wonderful to make for children and those that are sensitive to alcohol. It won't be quite as strong as the alcohol tinctures, just like the glycerins. However, it does have wonderful benefits all its own. The apple cider vinegar, which is generally used to make the aceta, it helps to regulate the acid alkaline balance in the system, which is great as a digestive tonic. And it's also good for those tonics such as calcium tonic, very high in potassium and also really high in enzymes. So there's all these added benefits to the medicinal qualities of whatever herb that you're extracting. It can be used for a long period of time to help rebuild and strengthen the system. It will last for about 6 months to 2 years. So, again, it won't last for quite as long as the alcohol tinctures. However, if you do want to extend the shelf life of the aceta, you can certainly add some alcohol to it after the extraction process if you'd like to. Just make sure that you end up with 25% alcohol in the aceta to make sure that it helps preserve it.
The second ingredient to your herbal tinctures is, of course, the herbs. You want to make sure that you are choosing good quality herbs, so you want to purchase from a reputable source. If the herbs are dried, you want to make sure that they have good color similar to the fresh herbs. You want to make sure that they have a good aroma, that they have a good taste to them that is similar to the fresh herbs, and that they have been dried properly. If you are comfortable with positive plant identification, you can source, or what we call wild crafting, which is harvesting your own herbs out in the wild. And this will be the finest quality that you can possibly find. You can dry your own herbs, or that's not even necessary. You don't have to do that, but I would let them wilt in the shade for a day or someplace warm, overnight perhaps, to let some of that water evaporate from the herbs. If you are using fresh and you are tincturing directly, immediately, right after harvesting, then you're going to want to use a higher percentage of alcohol. When you are harvesting your herbs, you want to harvest them at the right time of the year. So if you're harvesting herbs, you want to harvest them just prior to flowering. And if you are looking for the herbal medicine from the flowers, you want to harvest those just as they're opening, when there's still some buds on the plant. You can include some of the stems if you like, if it's not too woody, and if the stems seem to have some of the medicinal qualities of the flowers or the leaves. If you are harvesting roots, it's usually good to harvest those once the plant has died back down for the season. So this would be in autumn or the fall, when a lot of that energy is put back down into the roots. You also want to make sure that you harvest mid-morning after the dew has evaporated for the day and the plants again are not carrying too much moisture. Making your tincture could not be simpler. First, you'll need a sterilized jar that is completely dry, and I like ones with a real wide mouth on them and that have a tight sealing lid. Check inside the lid to make sure there isn't a cardboard ring in it. You're going to want to remove that. So to begin with, we're going to chop up the herb. Here I'm making a motherwort tincture, and motherwort is one of my favorite tinctures. It has so many wonderful uses. It's really wonderful for the heart, strengthening and gladdening the heart, especially when there is anxiety involved. Motherwort is a wonderful, relaxing herb, great to take when you're experiencing a lot of stress, and who doesn't have that these days? It's also a really great herb for menopausal symptoms, so it has a lot of different uses. So I really always like to keep some motherwort tincture on hand. What I'm doing is cutting up the herb in small pieces. Some people really finely cut their herb, and you can certainly do that, but I find I get a really good quality just by cutting it up as I'm doing here. So I'm going to fill this jar until it is almost full to the top, and then I'm going to pour my menstruum. In this case, I am using alcohol, and I'm going to be pouring that over the herb until it is completely covered. I don't want any air to touch the herbs. I want the alcohol to completely cover the top of that. The jar should be as full as possible with the least amount of air in there. This will help prevent oxygen from getting in there and possibly spoiling the tincture. Now, I've just talked about the very simple way of making tinctures. And this is how I like to make my herbal medicine, and it's the same way I cook. I don't tend to measure things very well. And you really don't need to. It does not need to be complicated. But some people do like to measure everything out. And in that case, there are two types of different measurements, one for fresh and one for dried herbs. For fresh herbs, regardless of the menstruum that you're using, you're going to want a 1-to-2 ratio by weight. What this means is 1 part herbs in grams to 2 parts of the menstruum in milliliters. And that should give you a really good quality tincture. Again, make sure that the herbs are completely covered by the liquid, by the menstruum. If you're going to be using dried herbs, there is a bit more liquid that will be necessary. So you will use 1 part herbs in grams to 5 parts of the menstruum in milliliters. And when using dried herbs, you're going to want to shake that bottle a little bit more. It tends to really settle out at the bottom. You'll find that when you pour the menstruum over the dried herbs, that they really expand. It's quite surprising. So that's why you need so much more liquid. Now, you don't need to shake the herbs every day. In fact, it's not absolutely necessary to shake them at all, but it really does help to prevent the herbs from becoming real solid at the bottom, and really helps to energize your herbs and mix up that menstruum with the herbs real nicely. I would like to mention here a little bit about standardization, because you will probably hear that term from time to time. Since pharmacists tend to criticize herbalists that herbs can vary from product to product, some herbalists have attempted to adopt some sort of standardization by measuring precisely and also precisely standardizing the amount of alcohol to the water ratio. And in order to do this, you really need to standardize the alcohol to water ratio based on each and every specific herb, because different herbs have different amounts of water within them just naturally. So some attempts have been made to do this, but there really is no official standardization. And really, in reality, there is no way to truly standardize without extracting specific constituents. So, for example, some pharmaceutical companies, and which is really like making drugs, will take a particular constituent out of the plant and standardize just to that one particular constituent. But plants have hundreds of different constituents in them, and each plant is a whole plant. Herbs really work their best as whole entities, not isolated compounds or constituents that are removed on their own. That's really when you can start seeing side effects happening. Plants are best when all of the different compounds and constituents work together. Another issue with standardization, and the reason why it really isn't possible, is that herbs vary on all different kinds of factors. The herbs can be different based on the time of day they're collected, whether it's morning, late day. Herbs change during the course of the year, and they also change with environmental conditions. If it's a very rainy year, a very dry year, a very cold year, a very warm year, all of those different plant constituents do vary from time to time with the seasonal patterns, the weather patterns. There are so many variables that it just really is not possible to standardize. So I believe that you will find you can make really good quality tinctures just by using the methods that we've talked about here. Some of your tinctures may turn out a little bit stronger than others. The variation will not be that great, but you will find that you will make very, very good, exceptional quality, which I believe is standardized quite enough. So we don't really need to go to the pharmacologist way of standardizing their drugs and their pharmaceuticals. Now that we have our tincture made, as I said before, we're going to let this sit for 4 to 6 weeks in a warm, dark place. And again, you can shake it daily if you like, or once or twice during that time. And if you don't, again, don't worry too much about it. You'll know when your herbs are done when they really take on a nice, rich color, and they taste and smell like the herb that you've been extracting. So once you're pretty confident that your herb is done, you're going to go ahead and strain the herb. I do this using a strainer and some cheesecloth, and I do fold the cheesecloth over twice or sometimes 4 times if the particles are real small that I want to strain out. You want it to be porous enough for the liquid to go through, but you want to keep the herb from going into your final bottle. So strain this into another sterilized jar. Again, I really like a wide mouth jar with a tight fitting lid. Make sure you squeeze out all the remaining liquid from that herb. There are lots of really great constituents left in there, so you want to make sure you get all of that goodness into your jar. You will let this sit for a day or so and just see if any particles fall to the bottom. If you've strained it really well, you shouldn't have any what they call sludge at the bottom or any sort of residue falling down to the bottom. If so, go ahead and strain it a second time. And if the herb that you used was really fine and there's a lot of particles in there, you can actually use something that is a lot less porous, such as a coffee filter. Works really good. And once you have this in your final bottle, you're going to want to make sure that you seal that tightly. And always make sure to label your herbs. So you want to label what herb you used, what menstruum you used, and the date that you made it. Be sure to store this in a cool, dark dry place. It will make your tincture last quite a bit longer. I'm also going to briefly show you making a tincture with roots. It's real similar to what we just did with the motherwort, but you will want to chop up the roots such as I'm doing here. You can either grate the roots, you can peel them. Some people like to make them real fine. I find that just chopping up into these small chunks works just great. I get really wonderful, beautiful, rich tinctures out of them. This is burdock, which is one of my favorites. It's a biennial, which means it lives for 2 years. So you want to collect the roots in the fall of the first year or the spring of the second year. Burdock is one of those wonderful backyard medicinal plants that a lot of us see growing around us. It's very common. And it has so many amazing uses. It's really great for cleansing the body to help eliminate waste materials and toxins. And it does this by being a blood purifier and also is really a great liver tonic. And for both of these reasons, it is really good for all different types of skin diseases. Burdock also has anti-tumor effects and can help control blood sugar. So again, it's one of those that I always have on my shelf. I make burdock tea, I make burdock tincture, I put burdock in my food. It's kind of like cooking with carrot. It's actually really delicious, somewhat sweet, wonderful. So as you can see here, I am putting the burdock in the jar and filling it with, in this case, alcohol. And I am completely covering the roots, chopped roots, just like I did with the motherwort herb. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to seal this tightly and let it sit for 4 to 6 weeks, shaking it occasionally. And then I'm going to strain it, just similar that I did with the motherwort. You don't have to squeeze the roots out quite as much. They don't seem to absorb a lot of as much liquid within the herb. You can try squeezing it a little bit, but you won't get much additional out of it. And again, you can take a look the next day to see if anything has precipitated out that is sitting down at the bottom of the tincture that you want to remove, so you can strain a second time. Again, seal tightly, label it, and store it properly. You'll want to store your tinctures in the smallest jar possible. This will keep a lot of the oxygen out of the jar and extend the shelf life of your herb. So as you use more of your herb, you can eventually pour it into a smaller bottle. And I also like to pour my tinctures into these small dropper bottles, which makes it really easy to use. You can just simply put some drops under the tongue or put some drops into some juice or tea or coffee, so it makes it really easy to administer your tincture. For dosages, it depends on whether it is a chronic, ongoing, long-term condition or whether it's more of an acute, short-term condition. For adults, for a long-term, ongoing condition, I would use 30 drops each time, and I would do that 2 or 3 times a day. For a more acute condition, such as for a fever, you will want to take smaller, more frequent doses every half hour. For children, you'll want to administer 3 to 5 drops 2 or 3 times a day. It's best to take your tinctures before bedtime and also between meals. It just helps for the tincture to absorb better. Also remember that more is not better. One large single dose is actually less effective. So adhere to these protocols for the best possible benefits. Burdock is a biennial plant, which means that it lives for only 2 years. The first year, only the leaves emerge, and these are very large, distinctive looking leaves. The second year, the plant shoots up a flowering stalk, which is equally as distinctive. As one of the thistles, the flowers turn into burrs later in the growing season. These are the burrs that stick to your clothing and stick to your pet's fur, and that's how most of us get to know this plant. There are 2 different species of burdock that are most often used in herbal medicine. There is greater burdock with the botanical name Arctium lapa, and there's also common burdock, or sometimes called lesser burdock, and it has the botanical name of Arctium minor. Both get their common name from the burrs. The second part of the name dock is an old term for tall, coarse weeds. You want to harvest the taproots of the plant and do that later in the first year of growth or very early in the second season. Any later and the roots just start becoming too woody to use, and they get this hollowed out part in the center, and they're just not the quality that you want. They have extremely long taproots, so this is very, very challenging to dig up. You need a very long shovel and a lot of strength and patience. It is common growing in the wild, so you can harvest it yourself if you know how to properly identify it, but you can easily purchase it. Just about anyone sells it. In fact, it's often sold in co-ops or even well-stocked grocery stores since a lot of people eat it as food. But burdock makes a truly beneficial medicine as well. When taken internally, burdock root helps to cleanse the toxins and waste material from the body. It's almost always included in internal cleansing formulas. It works in a few different ways. First, it helps to purify the blood and helps to improve the liver function. Secondly, burdock helps the kidneys remove accumulated waste products. It's also slightly laxative, helping to improve bowel function. This cleansing action is really beneficial for the skin as well, since toxins and wastes are often eliminated through the skin. Therefore, it's one of those herbs most often used for conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, boils, dandruff, and even acne. For skin conditions, be sure to start with a small amount of tincture and then work your way up to a normal tincture dose, since you don't want to expel those toxins through the skin too quickly. You can also use it externally as a wash or a compress to provide relief from red, irritated, itchy skin conditions such as a rash or even where there's measles, shingles, or chickenpox. Burdock is also valuable for digestion, and it helps to promote beneficial microflora. It does this since it includes a compound called inulin. And inulin does a number of different things. It helps with calcium and magnesium absorption, and it also helps to lower blood sugar. Finally, burdock is included in two famous cancer remedies. You'll see it in the Essiac formula, and you'll also see it in the Hoxsey formula. Both tinctures and teas can be made with the burdock root. It has no known contraindications, side effects, or interactions with any drugs. Both the common name and the botanical name of this plant say a great deal about its use as medicine. First, the common name, motherwort, refers to mother with its use as a female reproductive tonic, and wort, which essentially means herb. This alludes to its affinity for the reproductive system as a uterine tonic. It's used as a mild sedative for menstrual pain and cramping and helping to regulate the cycle. For older women, it's often used for menopausal conditions that result in hot flashes, mood changes, and sleep problems. Even though the name references mothers, it's not to be used by pregnant women. Secondly, the botanical name, Leonaris cardiaca, also says so much about this plant. Leonaris translates to lion, and cardiaca translates to useful for the heart. So together, it means lion-hearted. So motherwort strengthens the heart, especially when the heart is impacted due to tension, stress, or anxiety. These can lead to hypertension and irregular heartbeat. If hypertension and irregular heartbeat are caused by some other underlying condition, then it's wise to consult an experienced practitioner. But if they are the result of tension and stress, then motherwort's a very appropriate remedy. Even when the heart is not involved, Motherwort still makes a useful remedy for stress and anxiety. Often this can be brought about due to some fearful event. The use of motherwort for fear alludes to that lion-heartedness, bringing about courage to change the situation. Even though motherwort seems like a woman's herb, it definitely can be used by men for this purpose as well. When you put all of motherwort's virtues together, you have the ultimate remedy for women experiencing hot flashes with nervous heart palpitations. This is why it is so well known as a menopausal remedy. There are no known contraindications, side effects, or drug interactions. The herb and herbal tea are extremely bitter tasting and certainly not enjoyable as a tea, so it's best to make it up as a tincture. Motherwort can commonly be found in the wild, and it's also very easy to purchase it online. Echinacea benefits and uses are widely known among herbalists and non-herbalists alike. It has become one of our most popular herbal medicines. Echinacea is also called purple coneflower, and it's often found as an ornamental in gardens. These large, showy purple blooms are beautiful, and they're very easy to grow. Echinacea was native to the North American prairies, from Texas all the way up into Canada. The species Echinacea purpurea is the largest and most beautiful of the echinaceas. And it's the one that is most often used to make tinctures because there's so much material to work with because it is a larger plant. There are two other species, which is Echinacea angustifolia and Echinacea pallida, and they are still very good medicinals to use. It's important to grow Echinacea yourself or to purchase the plants that are organically and responsibly grown. This is because the plants in the wild are at risk of being overharvested since they are so popular as herbal medicines. Medicinally, you can use all parts of the plant. Many herbalists simply make a tincture of the root. However, this does take the life of the plant. To use all parts of the plant, harvest the leaves and the seeds during the second year of growth, and then harvest the flowers and the roots during the third year. Echinacea has a long traditional use by Native Americans. Today, it's one of the top immune-enhancing herbs. It raises the body's natural resistance to infection when the immune system is temporarily weakened. Specifically, Echinacea helps to lessen the incidence, severity, and the duration of colds and flu. It's used for bronchitis, sore throats, oral infections, laryngitis, tonsillitis, or excess mucus in the sinuses. Echinacea is antibacterial and antiviral, and it works by increasing the macrophage and T cell activity, which is the body's first line of defense against foreign antigens. If taking Echinacea for prevention, take a half a teaspoon of tincture twice daily. Now, this is for short-term prevention only. This is not something that you take throughout the whole cold and flu season. You do not want to take it for any longer than 8 weeks. I would say maybe even not longer than 4 weeks. And don't use it in place of really building and nourishing a healthy immune system. Now, if you're going to take Echinacea once a cold or flu hits, be sure to start taking the tincture frequently, right at the very first signs of infection. And you want to take quite a bit of it. So this would be a half a teaspoon every 2 hours for the first 24 to 48 hours. Echinacea is also an exceptional detoxifier by helping to cleanse the blood and the lymphatic system. It's what herbalists call an alterative. Topically, Echinacea is antiseptic for sores, cuts, bites, stings, boils, acne, and fungal infections. And you would use the tincture for this to use it topically. It's also used for any type of inflamed skin condition. So I would use it both internally and externally for the best results. It is generally recommended not to take echinacea if an autoimmune disease is present. There is some controversy around this, but better safe than sorry. And also, do not take it with any immunosuppressant medication. Hawthorn is a small tree with these beautiful white to pink flowers in the springtime, similar to apple trees. There is a long history of use of hawthorn for medicine, and there's also a great deal of folklore associated with hawthorn, especially in the European traditions. Today, there are numerous scientific studies regarding its use, so it really has that blend of both the traditional use and the scientific backing. While hawthorn flowers and leaves are often used in herbal medicine, the berries make excellent medicine. Hawthorn is one of the top herbal medicines for the heart and circulation. It strengthens the heart muscle, improves the blood flow through the heart and arteries. This helps to regulate heart rhythm and blood pressure. Hawthorn also lowers harmful cholesterol, which, when combined with hypertension, can lead to arteriosclerosis. All parts of hawthorn contain flavonoids that help to protect the cardiovascular system. In particular, there's anthocyanins, which have anti-inflammatory properties as well as antioxidants. Hawthorn also works on the emotional level of the heart for those that are grieving or for those that are experiencing sadness or any kind of mild to moderate depression. It can be taken alone or it can be taken as part of a larger formula, which is often how it's seen. Hawthorn is quite safe for all age groups, from children to the elderly. Be sure to take hawthorn tincture for at least 4 weeks to see the best results. The only caution would be is to consult a doctor or qualified practitioner if already taking any kind of heart medication. The reason for this is because it can confuse the results of any kind of monitoring that's being done. Valerian is also called garden heliotrope, so you might see it under either name depending on where you live. It's originally native to Europe, and its use goes all the way back to Greece around 400 BCE, so that's pretty amazing. Today, you can find it widely used throughout Europe and the United States and a number of other parts of the world. It's the root that's used medicinally. You can easily grow your own or purchase the dried root, whichever you prefer. It's a beautiful garden plant, so if you do have a space, I would highly recommend it. The aroma of the dried root is very disagreeable. It's a bit like dirty socks. It's pretty gross. Due to the poor aroma and flavor of the herb, it really is best to take it as a tincture rather than a tea. Valerian is a very safe herb to use, and it's used primarily as a mild sedative. Don't confuse valerian with Valium. They sound alike, but Valium is a pharmaceutical that is not nearly as safe as the herb valerian. Valerian's not habit forming, and you won't feel groggy from it at all. Valerian is best to use for any type of tension or pain. Tension includes stress, anxiety, headache, migraine, or muscle tension. And pain would include any muscle pain, joint pain, backache, cramps. It's most noted as a relaxing nervine for insomnia. So those prone to difficulties with sleep can take a tincture bottle and put it next to their bed at night. And if they wake up, just simply take some during the night to help them go back to sleep. It's very simple and easy to use. I will add that oddly, in roughly 10% of the people, valerian has the opposite effect and can actually keep them up all night. So you just want to test it out and see how it works for you. Even though for most people, valerian is a mild sedative, it's also known to increase the circulation of the digestion, of the cardiac function, and of lung function. You want to begin by taking a quarter dropperful and increase really slowly until the effects of the herb are felt. It's also a nice idea to take a break from this herb 1 week out of each month. It's a very safe herb. There's no known contraindications, side effects, or interactions with other drugs. One of the most common ways to use herbal medicine is to simply make a cup of tea. Tea is most effective for long-term gradual healing, and it really excels at preventative medicine. Making a cup of tea and sipping on it is really warming and soothing to the system. Teas can also be used for more acute situations, such as fever or something that is happening right now, although a lot of people tend to grab for tinctures in those type of situations, but tea is equally as effective. Tea is really good at extracting vitamins, minerals, and all different types of medicinal compounds from plants. There is so much variety in the flavor of tea. Some of it is really great tasting, some of it is bitter or maybe a bit unfamiliar, but there is strength in that bitter and in those unusual flavors. Surprisingly, there are a lot of different ways to make tea. At its most easiest, you can brew a cup of tea by purchasing tea bags and letting those steep in hot water, or if you've wildcrafted, which means harvested your own herbs and dried them, or if you've purchased loose leaf tea, you can use a strainer or just simply spoon some of it into a cup or a pan. It's interesting that while some like to weigh and measure their herbal preparations as well as their cooking when they make food, it seems like that hardly ever happens with herbal teas. Most of us just use the quantity that tastes good and does the desired work. To make tea, you can use fresh herbs, you can use dried herbs. The dried herbs tend to be a little bit better because the cell structure is brittle. It's been broken down during that drying process. So for dried herbs, I would recommend, if you do like to measure, to use 1 teaspoon per cup of dried herb, or if you're using fresh herb, a full handful per cup of tea. This type of tea using warm water is called an infusion, and it can use the leaves of a plant, flowers of the plant, even fruits of the plant. In order to make an infusion, just place the bit of herb that you're going to be using in a pan or a jar and pour hot boiling water over it. Cover it. You do want to cover it because many of the herbs have volatile oils in them, and by not covering it, those volatile oils can release and escape, and a lot of those volatile oils are really good medicine, so you want to keep them in there. So keep that covered up so that you can utilize those volatile oils. You can also make cold infusions. This would be an infusion or a tea that uses cold water, so no heat, and this can be useful for many different reasons. For example, when making a tea with, say, marshmallow or slippery elm or something that's really mucilaginous, and mucilaginous is kind of a slimy texture, which doesn't sound real appealing, but it makes excellent medicine for soothing those inflamed tissues, like the mucous membrane. So for example, if there's a sore throat or for stomach ulcers or those types of conditions, it's really nice to have some of that mucilaginous compounds in your tea, and that only extracts in cold water. So you'd want to use a cold infusion for that rather than the hot infusion. Also, for making something such as a sumac infusion, it's called Sumac Aid. Absolutely delicious, a nice cooling remedy, wonderful to sip on during those really hot summer days, can help cool down the system. You're going to want to make a cold infusion there as well. If not, the flavor will not be as wonderful, and it really is good. When they call it sumac aid, it tastes just like lemonade if done correctly. You can see me making some here, and it's absolutely delicious. I highly recommend it. But you want to make sure you're using cold water, not hot water. The hot water will just extract the bitter principles, and if that's what you're looking for, great. But if not, then you want to make sure to use cold water. Here's a tea that I really enjoy. It's called sun tea, or some people call it a solar infusion. It's just another type of infusion. But rather than boiling the water, you place the herbs into a pan of water and cover tightly and let it sit out in the sun for a few hours. And it really imparts a different flavor in the tea. It can be medicinal and it can be tea that just tastes really amazing. In this case, I'm making some lemon balm solar infusion, and it is absolutely delicious. The lemon balm is a nice, calming, relaxing tea, very flavorful. It does have that lemony flavor, and I love to make this sun tea and then put it over ice on those hot summer days. Absolutely delicious. Up to now, we've been talking about different types of infusions, but there's also a type of tea that is called a decoction. This is more for tough plant material. So this would be the roots of a plant or barks or the nuts. And it's more difficult to extract this type of plant material or the medicinal properties from this type of material. So in order to make a decoction, you want to simmer the herbs in water for about 15 to 20 minutes. So simply place the pan of water on the stove, add your herbs, and make sure that you cover it and just simmer it real slowly. Here's one form of making tea that I never hear anyone talk about, but I think it's really important for me to share this with you. I really like to save the water from when I'm steaming herbs, such as in this case, I'm steaming nettle for a wonderful dish, and it's one of my favorite wild foods. And at the bottom, there's always this wonderful, rich water left over, and I can never bear to throw it away. And when I sip on it, it tastes just like the nettle tea that I make. So it's a wonderful byproduct of cooking, and that is valuable medicine in there that you can enjoy right along with your meal. The dosing of your medicinal tea will change depending on why you're taking the tea. If the condition is a chronic, constant, recurring condition that persists for a long length of time, then you're going to want to make the tea less strong and take a couple of cups daily, about 2 cups daily, for about 2 to 4 weeks until the condition subsides. So you're going to want to make possibly a larger batch rather than just cup by cup. You can store the tea in a refrigerator for a day or two and reheat it. For more acute situations, so for those situations that are happening immediately, such as for a fever, you'd want to make a more concentrated tea and then serve that in smaller, more frequent doses to be more effective. So for example, you may want to take a half a cup every half hour or so. On a final note, you want to make sure the tea tastes good so that you or whoever you're serving the tea to will continue to take it until they're healed. And a great way to do this, especially for some of the less better tasting teas, is to add a little bit of honey, which is wonderful, medicinal, all in its own right, and really will make your tea taste delicious. So enjoy and have fun with it. Nettles have such a rich tradition of medicinal use. They can be incorporated into food and taken as a tincture, but most often they're dried and made into a tea. The tea makes a dark, rich herbal beverage. It may take some getting used to, although once you do, you will love drinking it. You can actually feel the nourishment feeding your body with every sip. Nettles are beloved by herbalists for actually many reasons. Nettles strengthen and support the whole body and build energy. They're highly nourishing with abundant vitamins and minerals, especially calcium and protein. And with their high iron content, nettles are one of the preferred herbs to use for anemia and that corresponding fatigue that comes with it. They're most appreciated for their ability to help build and restore the liver. This is important as our livers encounter so many toxins from our environment through our air, food, water, cleaning products, and even household furnishings. Since nettles nourish the liver, they subsequently are beneficial for the skin, in particular acne and eczema. Nourishing the liver is also beneficial for those with seasonal allergies, such as hay fever. And some people believe this is also due to the histamine content. I generally recommend when using nettles for seasonal allergies to start about 6 months before the season to really benefit that liver before the season hits. Nettles tonify the reproductive system as well. This is helpful for PMS symptoms as well as menopausal symptoms. Nettles also tonify the kidneys, making them a beneficial herb anytime the kidneys or the urinary tract is compromised. In particular, nettles have a diuretic effect, helping to remove excess water and any congested fluids from the body. Nettles are also frequently employed for joint pain. Their anti-inflammatory properties assist with gout and arthritis. This is helpful for growing pains in children as well. Many people purposely sting their joints with the fresh plant, which takes a little braveness to do. However, the internal tea should be taken simultaneously, but many people really do swear by it and really believe that it works. So I'll let you just ponder that and see if you want to actually try that yourself or not. Finally, the very strong tea has been used as a wash to darken hair color. Caution should be taken if harvesting from the wild due to the stinging hairs. This makes them one of the easiest plants to identify for harvesting in the wild. They can also be grown, but most often nettles are purchased from any good herb supplier or co-op. Nettles are one of the safest herbs with no contraindications, side effects, or drug interactions. While nettle tinctures are also valuable medicine, the incredible nutritional value is greatly diminished over taking it as a tea. Marshmallow has been used in traditional European medicines for more than 2,000 years. It's a quick-growing perennial with beautiful velvety gray-green leaves and these striking pale pink flowers. It's really beautiful to grow in the garden. The root is the primary part of the plant used medicinally. However, the leaf and flower are also sometimes used. You want to gather the roots in either the spring or in the fall. Marshmallow is a nutritive tonic with mucilaginous properties. Mucilaginous means slippery or gelatinous. It's actually quite slimy. This texture is really useful for soothing and lubricating irritated and inflamed tissues. In particular, use it for dry coughs. You can use it for bronchitis and whooping cough. It also has an affinity for inflamed or irritated conditions of the digestive system, such as gastritis, peptic ulcers, and colitis. Many find it useful for urinary infections as well, and it would be most appropriate used in a formula for that purpose. Externally, it's slightly antibacterial and infection fighting. Make a tea to use as a compress for dry, chapped conditions or in a bath for itchy skin, including eczema and diaper rash. And it also can be used for sore, inflamed eyes. While the flowers are edible and sweet, they're very good in salads, the root of this plant was used to make the original marshmallow treats. Cold water infusions are the best way to get the most mucilage from the plant. It's very safe. There's no contraindications or side effects with the plant. Marshmallow, however, may delay the absorption of pharmaceuticals if taken simultaneously, so you want to be sure to take it at least 2 hours away from taking any pharmaceuticals. While lemon balm is closely related to mint, oregano, and thyme, it has a surprising and a delicious lemony flavor and aroma. It is such a joy when walking by the plant in the garden to take a leaf and crush it between the fingers. The aroma is heavenly. It does lose its flavor and aroma quickly when dried. So, if wanting to impart that wonderful flavor into your tea, be sure to use fresh leaves. This means that you'll either have to grow it or know where it's growing in the wild. However, you can also use the dried herb, which is easily purchased either online or any well stocked natural food store or co op. Lemon balm is a gentle and effective nerve tonic, useful for tension, general exhaustion, stress, anxiety, even for grief or mild depression. It goes really nicely into formulas as a sleep aid. And it can also be helpful for children with ADHD or nightmares. It's very, very safe even for children. Lemon balm has carminative properties, which means that it's useful for gas, bloating, or any kind of indigestion. In particular, it can help with digestive issues related to tension or stomach distress. It does this by relaxing both the stomach and the nerves. For those unable to eat due to nervous tension, lemon balm helps to stimulate the appetite. Additionally, it has antispasmodic effects in the gastrointestinal tract. Antispasmodic action can extend to other parts of the body as well. This is helpful for tension headaches, muscle tension, or menstrual cramps. Lemon balm has a tonic effect on the heart as well. And it's a nice addition to cardiovascular formulas where tension is part of the underlying cause of the condition. So you can see here throughout all of its different uses, there's always that underlying cause of tension. And that's when I think of lemon balm. A hot infusion of the herb can be made for any of these purposes. Hot tea will also have some diaphoretic properties, which help to open the pores and sweat out a fever. It's best combined with other diaphoretic herbs such as elderflower or yarrow flower for this purpose. A sun tea with the fresh herb can be made during the growing season, and this is particularly delicious and refreshing. The herb can be made into a tincture as well. As far as cautions, it's best to avoid large doses of the herb for those with hypothyroidism. Other than that, it's a very safe herb for adults and children alike. While the oats that are used medicinally come from the same plant as the ones used to make your morning oatmeal, they're not the same. Medicinal oats are not processed like oatmeal is. Rather, they're the plant still in its natural state. You can find oats often growing near old farm fields where they've escaped cultivation. However, you can easily purchase the dried herb at food stores, co-ops, or any online herb store as well. Two parts of the plant are used: the stalk, which is called oat straw, and then also the flowering tops, which are called milky oats or sometimes just called oat tops. They're both used in slightly different ways. The milky oats are most often made into a tincture since they have to be harvested just as the oat tops are maturing. And this can be a challenge since there is such a short time frame in which to harvest, so you really have to keep an eye out for it. However, if we find oats in the wild outside of this short period, or if we purchase either oat straw or oat tops dried, a wonderful tea can be made into medicine. First, oats help to bring the nervous system back into balance. Oats nourish and feed the nervous system. And this is helpful when nerves are frayed due to overwork or to exhaustion. The nutrients in oats help to repair the system, in particular due to that high calcium content. In addition to high calcium, oats are high in protein, and they're also high in vitamins, including A, the B complex, C, E, and vitamin K. They're also very high in minerals, and this would include iron, potassium, magnesium, chromium, selenium, manganese, zinc, and silica. Since the nutrients in oats support bone health, they would be indicated for those with osteopenia, which is a condition of having weak bones. Those nutrients in oats are also beneficial for hair, teeth, nails, and skin. Topically, an oats compress can be made with the tea for any kind of itchy skin condition. The tea should be made from a very long decoction in order to extract those nutrients from the herbs. Therefore, boil the oats for 40 minutes. For best results, take oats over a long period of time, such as several weeks up to several years. The herb is quite safe with no side effects or contraindications. The elder tree has some of the greatest folklore associated with it, as well as a long history of use. There are several species that can be used. However, most often seen is Sambucus nigra in Europe, and in the US, most often you see Sambucus canadensis. It's a small tree growing to about 30 feet at its highest. Both Sambucus nigra and Sambucus canadensis produce white, flat-top clusters of flowers, followed by dark purple berries later in the season. This is important because there are similar elder trees that produce white, conical clusters of flowers, followed by red berries. The latter is not used medicinally due to the cyanogenic glycosides. While the berries of elder are commonly made into syrups as an antiviral remedy, the flowers are almost always made into a tea. This can be served either hot or cold with different uses of each. The hot tea is a popular diaphoretic. This means that it helps to open the pores to sweat out a fever and drive out that excess heat from the body. While elderflower is most often indicated when someone has a fever and isn't sweating, it can certainly be used in all kinds of feverish conditions. It's often combined with yarrow flower and peppermint leaf for this purpose. You'll see that formula quite frequently. Elderflower can be an important part of protocols for colds and flu and can help shorten the duration of the illness. It does this by helping to clear mucus from the upper respiratory tract. This process of opening the pores has a benefit for the skin as well. It helps to gently detox the skin. The tea can also be used externally as a wash for any red, inflamed skin conditions such as sunburn. Some people also use it to clear freckles. It helps to brighten the skin. The cold tea has more of a diuretic action. Diuretics help to remove excess water and fluids from the body. To make a tea, proceed as you would for a hot herbal infusion. And once the herb is strained, let it cool down enough and place it in the refrigerator to cool further before using it. You can harvest elderflowers from the wild, or you can certainly purchase them. They're very safe, no known contraindications, side effects, or drug interactions. Those learning to use medicinal plants often wonder about herbal tinctures versus herbal tea. Both are quite effective as medicine. However, there are times you may prefer one over the other. Both herbal tinctures and teas can be purchased, or you can make them easily at home. And they can be made from single herbs, or they can be made from a formula or a combination of herbs. And they can both be used for a wide range of conditions. So let's take a look at the advantages of each one of those. First of all, let's start with the benefits of herbal tinctures. One of the reasons people look to herbal tinctures versus tea is that tinctures are convenient. They're made up and they can easily go with you in a purse. They can go in a pack. You can take them traveling with you quite easily. Just simply put the drops under your tongue or put the drops in a liquid such as water or juice. And dropping tinctures into a liquid is especially helpful for those tinctures that are really unpleasant tasting, or for those that are extremely bitter. Although, do keep in mind if you are taking bitter herbs for the sake of their bitter compounds, then you want those to taste bitter. But some of the others, you're looking for other results from the tinctures. And so, therefore, you can dilute them so the flavor is a little bit better tolerated and that it's more likely that you will stick to your herbal protocol. That's more important than anything, is that you stick with it. Since the teas have to be taken in a much greater amount than tinctures for the same or similar therapeutic results, poor tasting teas are usually pretty quickly ignored. It's really easy to just stop taking those if you really are having a hard time with the flavor of it. Once a tincture is made, it will last for several years. I usually hear, 2 to 3 years quoted, but some of my tinctures have lasted for a lot longer than that. And tinctures also use a lot less plant material than teas. And this is really important for some of those herbs that are at risk of being overharvested. We want to be careful about how much plant material that we are actually using. And it's actually a lot less expensive if you don't have to buy as much plant material too. Since teas need to be made each day or at least every 2 days, with possibly the second day's tea being stored in the refrigerator, you're going to be going through a lot more plant material, and you're going to be using a teaspoon to a tablespoon for each cup of tea. So this really starts to add up. Some herbal compounds are only extracted in alcohol, and they're simply not water soluble. So this would include compounds such as the resins, and that would include myrrh or pine. And then there are essential oils and many alkaloids that are also not water soluble. So you really do need to make a tincture if these are the particular healing plant compounds that you're trying to extract and that you're looking for. In general, tinctures are taken for acute situations, so something that is happening right now. Tinctures are fast acting since they go directly into the bloodstream. And they can be taken for longer term chronic conditions also, but generally for short term conditions, look to those tinctures first. They'll just act a lot faster than the teas will. Since only a small amount of alcohol is taken with each dose, alcohol consumption really is not a worry. However, for children or those sensitive to alcohol, you can make your tinctures, as we've talked about in this course, with glycerin or with vinegar, so you don't have to use the alcohol. Neither of those have the shelf life or extract as many medicinal compounds as the alcohol tinctures, but they are still very good, and you can still get very good quality, effective medicines from them. Now let's switch over to the benefits of herbal teas. Herbal teas are often just really enjoyable to drink. In fact, sometimes I drink them even when I'm not looking for the medicine. I'm just looking for something that tastes good and that I'm just simply enjoying. However, if you are looking for the medicine, sipping on a soothing cup of tea is very relaxing. So this is excellent for cases of insomnia. It's really lovely to drink a nice warm cup of tea before bed. And they can be formulated to taste good even if they are formulated for medicine. You can certainly add those mints or stevia, or there are just so many wonderful tasting herbs. Licorice is another great example. Another advantage for the teas is that anyone of any age can drink the herbal teas. So they're excellent medicine for children, excellent medicine for those preferring to avoid alcohol. And teas can be made right away. So let's say you need to start on something right now and you don't have your tinctures made up, then you can go ahead and start drinking the tea until your tinctures are ready. Tinctures require at a minimum 2 weeks to extract, but really ideally you wait up to 6 weeks to extract those medicinal compounds from the plants. Of course, you can go out and buy tinctures at many health food stores or co-ops, so you can get them right away as well. But teas are definitely something that's very easy to start drinking the day you feel like you need it. And pre-made tea bags can be part of a travel kit or a first aid kit, or you can take them to work with you. You just need to get a source of hot water for them, which you can even get on an airplane if you need. So I do like to bring my tea bags when I travel. Water-based teas are better extracting certain compounds, such as the polysaccharides and the mucilages. The mucilages are those slimy sort of material, which is kind of odd and it takes a little bit to get used to. But the mucilages are just really wonderful for soothing and coating those mucous membranes. And so they really do have their advantages, and they only will extract in the water. The teas are well suited also for extracting minerals and vitamins from plants. So you can get a lot of nutrients out of them into a water extraction. Now, teas are slower acting than tinctures, as we've talked about, but they're best suited for more long-term and chronic conditions. They really change the balance of the body over time. They can be, as I said, used in some acute cases too. A great example of this would be for soothing a sore throat. And teas can help provide liquids to the body when a lot of those liquids have been lost either to diarrhea or fever. You need to get a lot of liquids back into the system. So a hot tea can be excellent for this, and a hot tea can also be very good to help sweat out that fever. So you're doing two things here. You're sweating out the fever, but you're also adding liquids back into the body. You may find that it's not always herbal teas versus tinctures, and we've touched on that a little bit. But there may be times when you want to start with a tincture to address a situation right away quickly, and then move gradually to teas for longer term care. And you may also want to start with teas while your tinctures are extracting, as I mentioned. But some herbalists simply prefer to work primarily with tinctures or primarily with teas. You'll find as you become more experienced that you often reach for one more often than the other, and this is just part of your herbal learning journey. In this video, we're going to be making what is called herbal oils, also sometimes called infused oils. These are really simple to make. So basically you start with a good quality base oil, which is also sometimes called a carrier oil, and then infuse the herbs of choice in that oil and place it over gentle heat to extract the medicinal properties that you're looking for. These are not to be confused with essential oils. Essential oils are steam distilled, and you need specialized training, specialized equipment to make them, and they're very strong, so they're used in really diluted small doses. But we were talking here about herbal oils or infused oils, which are massaged into the skin so the healing qualities can be absorbed. They're great for all different kinds of uses. So they're used for sore muscles, swollen lymph, sunburn. They can be placed in the ear for ear infections. They can be placed on wounds. They make a really calming massage oil, even used as insect repellent. And oils will also be used as the base for making salves and creams, which we won't be talking about in this video, but it's also really beneficial to learn how to make salves and creams. There are so many wonderful herbs to use for oils, and I'll mention just a few of my favorites. There's dandelion flower, which I'm harvesting here, which is fabulous for relaxing tension in the muscles, especially in the back and the neck. And a lot of people have issues with back and neck tension. So this is a really good one. This is the oil that we're going to be making today. Mullein flowers are also really good for this purpose. And St. John's wort flowers are also very good for back pain and neck pain, especially when the nerves are involved. And St. John's wort oil is also fabulous for placing on burns, one of our best remedies that we have for that. Some of my other favorites are calendula oil, which is made from the calendula flowers. I make a lot of that for my skincare preparations. It is fabulous for helping to repair the skin. It's very soothing, anti-inflammatory, also very antioxidant. So I put it in a lot of my anti-aging creams for the skin, but it's also good for wounds since it is very antiseptic and astringent. One of the most powerful antiseptics and antibacterials we have is garlic, and so that makes a fabulous oil. And lavender is one of my favorites for making a really calming massage oil. For all of these oils, you can use fresh or dried. With the exception of garlic, I would use fresh garlic. But for all of the other plants that I've talked about, you could either wildcraft them as I'm doing here and collecting the dandelion flowers, or you can purchase them dried if you'd like to. If you're not comfortable with identifying the plants or if you don't have access to them, you can certainly purchase any of these ingredients. There are several different oils that you can use. One of the favorites used by many herbalists, and one of my favorites, is olive oil. It really is medicinal in that it nourishes and feeds the skin, so it's doing a lot of other good work in addition to the herbs that are infused in the oil. It's also really stable, so it'll last a long time. Just make sure that you purchase extra virgin olive oil. Another one that I really like is grapeseed oil. It's really light, non-greasy, and it has a lot of additional benefits, and that includes resveratrol, which is a great antioxidant, has vitamin E, linoleic acid, so it's a fabulous oil to use. It's also great since it is so light and non-greasy. It's really good for those massage oils. Another one is almond oil and even apricot oil, which is really good for sensitive skin. So if you're making any kind of remedies for those with any kind of red, irritated conditions such as rashes, or maybe even skincare products for rosacea or red inflamed skin, those two choices would be really, really good to use. Jojoba is also great. It's not actually an oil, it's a wax, but it is most similar to our own sebum. So it is another one of those that is really exceptional to use for skincare products that actually nourishes and heals the skin. And it's also really very stable. It's a little expensive, but in some cases it might be worth the splurge. To make the oil, you simply fill a jar with the herbs and cover the herbs with oil. This is the most simplistic way of making the herbal or infused oil, and it's the way that I use and the way that I was taught. If you do feel like you're someone that likes to measure everything, kind of like how you cook in your kitchen. Some of us just kind of throw things together and it turns out wonderfully, but some people really like to measure everything out. And if that's the case, what you will want to do is measure, if you're using fresh herbs, you will want to measure 100 grams or 3.5 ounces of herb to 300 milliliters or 2/3 of a pint. If you're using dried herbs, you'll use 100 grams to 3.5 ounces of herb to 500 milliliters or 1 pint of oil. If you're using fresh herbs, you're going to want to make sure that you let them wilt for a day or so first. The fresh herbs contain a lot of water content, and water and oil don't really like to mix. So you want to make sure that you wilt the herbs for a day. I usually let them sit overnight in a nice dry location, and let some of that water evaporate before making your oil. You'll really avoid some problems down the road if you go ahead and do that. Another way to avoid some of the problems with the oil possibly going bad is to use the smallest jar size possible for the amount of herbs and oil that you're going to be using. This keeps a lot of the oxygen out of the jar while it's infusing. So just two little tricks there to help you prepare the best oil possible. If it does go rancid during the process, you will be able to smell it. You also might be able to see some bubbles coming up in the oil. Just means that it's fermenting a little bit. And there are a number of different reasons why this can happen. I did mention the moisture. I also mentioned a lot of air in the jar. Also, if while the oil is infusing, if there's a lot of hot and cold, so let's say you're letting it sit outdoors on the deck in the sun, and the evenings get real cold and the next day gets real hot, that back and forth, that can actually help introduce some of the bacteria. So some things that you just want to avoid there. Whether or not you've used exact measurements for your oil, it's important to be sure that the oil completely covers the herbs. This will help keep that oxygen out of the herbs. And it's really good idea to take something like a chopstick or something and poke it down into the herbs and the oil to let any of those oxygen bubbles rise to the top and release before you go ahead and tightly cover the jar. I occasionally, during the extraction process, since I let my oil sit for 2 weeks, every once in a while I will open up that jar and take a chopstick and just make sure I'm getting any bubbles in there out. That really helps me produce a nice quality oil. Finally, I do make sure that I always label the jar because my jars do sit around for a while. If you're making your herbal infusion or infused oil in the crock pot, then certainly you don't need to label it. But since mine sit for a couple of weeks, I want to make sure that I put some sort of label on my jars that says what it is, what the herb is, what kind of oil I used, and then I date it. Once you have your herbs and oil in a jar, you're going to want to introduce a source of heat while you're infusing this oil. And the amount of time you're going to infuse it depends on the source of heat. There are a number of different ways you can do this, and you can really use your own creativity as to how you want to introduce this heat. Some people use an oven turned on real low. About 150 to 200 degrees is plenty. You want to make sure that you're not frying the herbs. We don't want to overly cook the herbs. We just want to slowly warm the oil so that those herbs infuse and really release those medicinal compounds into the oil. So using this oven method, you would want to leave the jar of herbs in the oven for about 2 to 3 hours. And it's always a really good idea to put some sort of jar or plate or something underneath the oil so that it doesn't spill over inside of your oven. In fact, for all of these methods, that's a really great way to do that. Some people like to use a double boiler, which works lovely. Again, you don't want to fry the herbs. You don't want that oil to get too hot. So you just want to simmer it really low, and you can do that for about 40 minutes. I tend to put my herbs in my furnace room. It's a very small room, and it's always very nice and warm in there and seems like the perfect temperature. And I actually let my herbs sit in there for about 2 weeks. But you can also use a wood stove. If that's producing heat, you can set the jar of herbs somewhere near the wood stove for a while, depending on how hot it is, whether it's stoked up or real fully or not. Some people also use a crock pot. So you can actually put the herbs and the oil directly right in the crock pot and put it on the lowest setting for about 2 to 6 hours. That is a really great way to make your herbal infused oils, although it tends to make a larger quantity because crock pots tend to be a bit larger unless you have one of the real small ones. That would actually work really, really well. So how do you know when the oil is done? Take a look at it and see if some of the colors of the herbs have infused the oil so that the oil takes on that nice rich color. It should also smell and taste like the herbs. So you know that those compounds have been released and they've been infused into that oil. It's been 2 weeks since I infused the dandelion flowers in the olive oil, and I can tell it's done now because it's taken on this beautiful, rich color, and the smell, the aroma, the taste has really taken on the dandelion flowers. So now it's time to strain. I'm going to use a couple of different tools to strain the flowers out of the oil. I'm going to use a strainer, which is pretty porous, so I'm going to line it with some cheesecloth, which I have doubled up so that it is a lot less porous. It's really going to help me capture the herbs while letting the oil through. So I'm going to dump that into a clean, dry jar. You want to make sure the jar is dry. We don't want any moisture in there. And I'm going to pour the herbs into that jar, and once all of the herbs have fallen into the cheesecloth, I'm going to squeeze that out. There's a lot of wonderful, rich botanical compounds that are still in those flowers, and I want that in my oil. So I'm going to squeeze that carefully into the jar and compost those flowers. And what I have remaining is just a wonderful looking oil, and it smells amazing. There is one more step that I usually do take. Sometimes sediment can fall to the bottom of the jar and it takes a day or so. So what I like to do is recover the jar, let it sit in a dark, cool place for a day or so, and come back to it and strain it even more carefully. I do this by pouring most of the oil off into another jar that is clean and completely dry, reserving some of that oil with the sediment at the bottom. And for the remaining oil, I will use a coffee filter because that is really not very porous at all, and let that oil soak down through the filter, which will contain any remaining sediment or residue that was at the bottom. This makes for a nice clean oil, and you won't have any problems with spoilage down the road. This oil should last for about 2 years. I do store it in a cool, dark, dry place, as I do with all of my herbal remedies that I make. Dandelions are not only one of the most common plants found in our backyards, but they're also one of the most beneficial plants. Dandelions are one of the first plants we learned to identify. They have bright yellow flowers in the spring and also have a distinctive white globe of seeds that follow. The downward pointing teeth of the leaves are also really quite distinctive. Their ease of spread makes them one of the plants that lawn owners work so hard to eliminate, and it really is a shame. They have no idea of the valuable medicine they're trying to eradicate. Dandelion flowers need to be harvested, but this should not be too difficult no matter where on the planet you live. This plant is found growing everywhere in the world. Just make sure that the area that you're collecting from hasn't been sprayed. And this is just as important for herbs that are being used topically as well as internally. The flowers make a beneficial herbal infused oil. They're known as a muscle relaxant, especially for the lower spine and neck areas. The oil is best used for a massage to help release that tension. The flowers can also be eaten. They make a lovely addition to salads. Other parts of the plant are used medicinally as well. The leaves and roots can be either harvested or purchased from any herb shop, co-op, or online store. The leaves can be eaten, which are very high in antioxidants, as well as high in minerals and vitamins such as iron, potassium, calcium, vitamin A, and vitamin K. The leaves used as a tea or tincture are diuretic, helping the kidney and the bladder function. The roots, also as a tea or tincture, have an affinity for the liver as a liver tonic and blood purifier. All parts of the plant are very safe. However, those with gallstones should not take the leaf internally without consulting a qualified practitioner. There are also rare reported cases of allergic reaction to that milky substance which is in the leaves and the stem. Verbascum thapsus is the mullein species most often used in herbal medicine. However, there are some other species that are quite often used as well. One is Verbascum densiflorum, and the other is Verbascum olympicum. These latter two are actually quite easier to harvest from because they contain a much higher density of flowers. Mullein is quite common growing in many parts of the world. It's one of the first plants to move into an area that has been disturbed. It helps to heal the land back into a more natural state. Mullein is a biennial, so this means that the first year it produces a rosette of large fuzzy leaves. They're very distinctive. The second year, it shoots up a tall, thick stalk with numerous small yellow flowers that bloom throughout the season. Similar to dandelion, the flowers will need to be harvested. Harvest each flower as it blooms on the flowering stalk. Since only a few flowers can be harvested at a time, you will either need to find a large patch of plants or use a trick taught to me by my dear friend, mentor, and teacher, Rosemary Gladstar. She gathers what flowers she can and puts them into the oil to let it extract for 2 weeks. She strains that out, then harvests the flowers from those same plants again and puts those into the same oil. After 2 weeks, she strains that out and harvests a third time, again from those same plants, putting the flowers into that same oil for a final 2 weeks. She then strains those flowers out and has her final mullein herbal infused oil. So that's a great way to get a lot of flowers from just a few plants. The most common use of mullein flower oil is as an antibacterial for ear infections. This can be combined with garlic oil or it can be used all on its own. Mullein flower infused oil acts as an anodyne to take away the pain of the earache, and it also exerts a lymphatic action on the area around the ear to help resolve the infection. So it's working in a number of different ways here. Put a few drops of the oil into the ear, and be sure to continue to use the mullein oil at least a few days after the infection is cleared. And be sure to treat both ears, even if only one is infected, because they are connected on the inside. Mullein leaf is used medicinally as well and can be harvested or easily purchased online. The oil is often used for tension in the back muscles, and leaf is also used internally as a tea or tincture for the respiratory system, especially for those deep-seated spastic coughs or those dry, irritating coughs, including bronchitis and asthma. It has a soothing, demulcent action, so that is a moistening action. Mullein is one of the safest herbs and has a very high safety rating. If using the leaves, you do want to take some care with the tiny hairs on the leaves, and those can be irritating. So you want to harvest with gloves, possibly, and you do want to be sure to strain the tea really well. I would recommend using a coffee filter. Similar to dandelion flower oil and mullein leaf oil, St. John's wort flower is valuable for back pain. Also similar to dandelion flower and mullein flower, it needs to be harvested fresh. Thankfully, it grows abundantly in many parts of the world, just like the other two plants. It works a bit differently than those other two plants, however. St. John's wort works on the nerves rather than the muscles. So you would use it for spinal pain where there are issues with the discs or where there's nerve pain or neuralgia. St. John's wort oil can also be used topically to relieve burns, sunburn, bruises, and I would even apply it to sprains. St. John's wort flowers, along with some of the top leaves taken internally as a tincture, help to increase the metabolism of both serotonin and melatonin. This is what makes it a great remedy for tension, for anxiety, mild to moderate depression, and what is called seasonal affective disorder, or SAD, SAD. Use it over a period of time for these purposes to get the full effect of the plant. When harvesting your own herb, be sure to collect the flowers just as they're opening, along with some of the unopened flower buds. So this means you're going to have to keep a very close eye on your plants to harvest them at just the right time. A few of the top leaves can be harvested along with the flowers. You're going to want to squeeze the buds of the flowers to see if a red juice exudes from it. If so, then it's ready for harvest. And both the oil from St. John's wort and the tincture turn this gorgeous, beautiful, rich red color. Then you know you're getting a really good quality product. Do not use St. John's wort even topically in conjunction with other pharmaceuticals or any kind of pharmaceuticals, since what happens is that it can help break down those pharmaceuticals in the liver and it makes them less effective. Also, some people say that large amounts of the plant can cause photosensitivity. Other than that, it's a very safe herb. Calendula grows naturally in the Mediterranean, but it is very easy to grow almost anywhere. It can also easily be purchased. Now, calendula is sometimes called pot marigold, which is confusing since it has nothing to do with the marigold plants that are commonly planted in gardens. However, calendula could be planted for its beauty alone. It has these large, bright orange, beautiful flowers. Sometimes it comes in yellow, but it's usually the orange flowers that are used medicinally. If you do grow your own, be sure to harvest the flowers every 3 days or so, and this encourages new blooms throughout the growing season. You want to harvest them just as those buds are starting to open. If some of the flowers are past their prime, simply let them go to seed. You can either save the seeds for replanting the following year, or they will just self-sow on their own and come up the following year all by themselves. Once you harvest, there will be this sticky resin on your fingers after harvesting, and that is a good sign that you are getting those resinous constituents, and that's what you want from the plant. If you choose to purchase calendula, it works just as well for making this calendula infused oil. Calendula is one of the best skin healing herbs, and it's a wonderful addition to aging skincare and wound healing recipes. It's soothing and it's antioxidant. Calendula oil encourages new tissue growth as well as repair, while also having antiseptic, astringent, and anti-inflammatory qualities. So there's quite a bit going on with this plant in terms of health for skin. You can use it for bruises, burns, sores, skin ulcers, skin infections, rashes, even diaper rash, very safe for children. Calendula is helpful for skin damage due to side effects of radiation therapy. Again, very safe to use during radiation. It's also an effective antifungal for athlete's foot, for example. It can be used for lymph congestion by applying it as a massage oil to that congested area. It helps to drain and cleanse the lymphatic tissue and glands where there's swelling. Use calendula internally as a tea or tincture for that lymph congestion as well. Internally, it is an effective antibacterial, just like it is externally, and it can be put into formulas for infections. As an astringent, it's useful for gastrointestinal issues such as ulcers, cramps, and diarrhea. Calendula is a very safe herb with no known contraindications or side effects. Do note, however, that there are a very few people who have been known to have an allergic reaction to the plant because it is within those aster family group of plants. Together, let's make a salve. Salves are herbal medicinal preparations that are semi solid and they're used topically. They can be used for all different types of purposes, such as wounds, burns, including sunburns. You can use them for rashes, eczema. They're really great for diaper rash. They can be used for sore muscles, and they actually make fabulous lip balms. So it's really valuable to learn how to make them. They only take a few ingredients and they look really professional when they're done. It's just amazing how really beautiful these salves are. Today we're going to be making a dandelion salve, which I really like for sore muscles. In particular, it really is fabulous for sore muscles in the back or a sore neck. It really seems to have an affinity for those areas. Some of the other salves that I really like to make are bone set, which can be used for crushed bone. Plantain is one of those that is used really quite often. It can be placed onto wounds. It has antibacterial activity, but one of its really true virtues is plantain actually draws material out of the skin. So if there's a sliver, if there's debris that's inside of a cut that you want to draw that out, even insect bites can draw out some of that toxin, or even bee stings if the stinger is still in the skin. You can place some of that plantain salve topically on top of the skin, and it works just beautifully. One of my other favorites is a burn salve. It's a combination of St. John's wort oil and calendula oils, two of my absolute favorites. So there are a number of different herbs that you can use. Monarda is another one, which is a really great antifungal, antiseptic. Some people call it bergamot, or some people call it bee balm. It has a number of different common names. But as you can see, there are many different types of herbs that you can make for different purposes, and these are really nice to have in your first aid kit. At the most basic level, to make a salve, you will need only two ingredients. You'll need wax, such as beeswax, and you'll need an herbal infused oil. This can be an herbal oil that you have made yourself, or you can actually purchase herbal oils that are already made for you. But I do highly recommend making your own oil. It will be far superior to anything that you can purchase. You can find your beeswax from beekeepers, or you can also purchase it from candle supply stores or maybe even craft supply shops. You can certainly find it in herb and health food stores. Just make sure that it's pure and untreated, and you want to make sure that it really smells like honey. You'll know you're getting a really good quality that way. So what we're going to do is melt the beeswax in a pan. Some people use a double boiler, but I just put it directly into a pan on really low heat. I do like to use a pan with a bit of a lip on it, so it really makes pouring that salve out a lot more simple. I've seen several different proportions of wax to oil, and you can change up this proportion depending on how soft or hard you would like your salve. Softer salves have more absorbency, so they really get into the skin a lot more easily. Whereas the harder salves are a bit more protective, so you might want to use those for your lip balm. And they're also better in warm weather. They won't melt quite as easily as some of those more softer salves. What I'm using here for the dandelion salve that I'm making is 3 tablespoons of wax that I will be melting, and I will be adding to that 1 cup of oil. Some other recipes that I've seen would be 1,000 milligrams of oil to 170 grams of wax. And again, you can increase or decrease those proportions as you see fit. What you're going to want to do is, once you melt that wax very gently on very low heat, is to add the oil and stir till everything is mixed well and take off the heat. You don't want it to stay on the heat for very long. A good idea is to test your consistency before pouring into your final containers. You can do that by just taking a tablespoon of the wax oil mixture and just put it in the refrigerator for a minute or two. It won't take very long. And once that solidifies, see if you like that consistency. If you would like it a little harder, a little softer, add a little more oil or wax as appropriate. Once that consistency is just how you like it, go ahead and pour that into some storage containers. I really like these shallow tins. It's very easy to access the salve and works really beautifully, and they fit nicely into travel kits or first aid kits. Feel free to play with some of these recipes. There are many other additions you can add to the salve. You don't need to, but you can really have fun with it and really make some quality, amazing medicinal products. You could add essential oils, for example, right at the very end before pouring into your containers. You could add some honey, vitamin E. You may even want to substitute some coconut oil or cocoa butter for some of the wax. Coconut oil tends to be a little more liquidy, whereas cocoa butter is almost the same consistency as the wax, and they can really add some additional medicinal properties to your salve. So take a look at some of those. Once you have poured the salve into your containers, you're going to want to make sure that you label that with what you have made, so what the ingredients are that you used, and also date it. These salves should be good if stored properly for about 3 years. And proper storage would be in a cool, dark, dry place. You can also, instead of using something similar to the tins that I've used here, you could also purchase lip balm containers. And they are wonderful. They roll up just like the professional containers that you buy at the store, and it makes just a lovely, beautiful product. Makes also really great gifts. A real simple recipe for a lip balm would be a cup of apricot oil with a 1/4 cup of wax. So 4 parts of oil to 1 part of wax, and just add a tiny touch of honey and a few drops of essential oil. I really like wintergreen, but you could use any type of flavor that you like. And that just makes a beautiful, beautiful lip balm. So enjoy your salves, have fun with it, experiment, and be creative. The 2 species of plantain that are most often used medicinally are greater plantain, which has the botanical name Plantago major, and also narrowleaf plantain, sometimes called English plantain, which has the botanical name Plantago lanceolata. These are also the 2 species that are found growing throughout most parts of the world. Once you learn to identify plantain, it's easy to find and readily available in many places. Look for plantain on any walking trail, whether in the sun or in the shade. It really thrives in yards that have been mowed or anywhere the land has been disturbed. This is what makes it such a great remedy. When you need it, it's often not far away. Harvest and use the leaves of the plant. For those that prefer to purchase the herbs, it's readily found in most herb shops and online stores. Plantain leaves are the first go-to plant for wounds of all types. It's beneficial in a number of ways. First of all, it has antimicrobial properties. Use it to prevent infections from new wounds and cuts, or to help deal with an infection once it sets in. Plantain is a very drawing plant, meaning it can help to draw out material and debris from the wounds. This is useful when there is dirt in the wound, or a stinger from a bee, or a sliver, for example. It also has a cooling tendency, which is handy since inflammation around wounds, as well as inflammations due to stings and bug bites, are hot conditions. This makes it useful for various rashes as well. It soothes and cools any kind of painful, itchy, red, irritated skin condition. To make plantain even more amazing for cuts and wounds, it has styptic ability to help stop bleeding. It can be used either as an oil or a salve. You can also simply take a fresh leaf, chew it up real good, and place it on the skin as a poultice. Used internally, plantain tincture, or especially the tea, is a well-known cough remedy, in particular for dry, hacking coughs. It has that cooling and also moistening effect on the lungs. Plantain also helps to purify the blood, therefore helping with liver issues and skin problems. Plantain is a very safe herb with no cautions for both internal and external use. Chickweed is native to Eurasia, but it has since naturalized in many temperate parts of the world, which are those parts that are between the tropics and the Arctic regions. It's actually one of the most widely dispersed weeds in the world today. The name Stellaria comes from the star-like appearance of the flower. There are 5 deeply notched white petals, making it look like there are actually 10 petals. It likes cooler temperatures, so look for it in the spring and fall, or in warmer climates, look for it in the wintertime. It usually will be found growing in the shade of a tree or under taller plants in the garden as like a garden weed, for example. It's best to harvest the fresh plant and let it wilt overnight before making it into a salve. This is because it contains a really pretty high water content. Dried chickweed has a very short shelf life of about 3 weeks, so it can be a bit difficult to purchase it. Just as chickweed grows in the cool, damp shade under trees, it has that same effect as a medicine. It's a cooling and moistening remedy, so it's useful for hot, dry conditions. It's what herbalists call an emollient, and this is what makes it such a wonderful herb in a salve form. The most common use of chickweed is for irritated skin conditions. The emollient qualities bring relief to itchy skin, such as eczema, chickenpox, or any type of rash, including dermatitis and poison ivy. It can be applied to insect bites, stings, and boils. A chickweed salve is always handy to have in the first aid kit. The fresh plant can also be used as a poultice for these conditions, and it can be applied to the eyelids for sore, irritated eyes as well. Many people use chickweed both internally as a tea and externally as a salve for stagnant lymph with swollen lymph glands, as well as for benign cysts. Just as chickweed is emollient when used externally, it has those same cooling, moistening effects when used internally as a tea. This is called demulcent. Demulcents are soothing to inflamed tissues, especially those irritated mucous membranes. It can be used for the lungs when there is dry, irritated cough during a cold, or for sore throat, hoarseness, or even bronchitis. Additionally, chickweed is soothing in the urinary tract.
We're going to be making an herbal infused honey, and these can be used for all different kinds of purposes depending on the herbs that you choose. For example, you could make a thyme infused honey, which is wonderful for colds and flu when there's cough or any kind of respiratory issues. Or you could make a rose infused honey, which is wonderful for the heart, both physically and emotionally. It's very good for grief and sadness. Today we're going to be making a lavender infused honey, which has a number of different purposes. It's very calming, relaxing. It's also uplifting. So you can use it for times of stress, anxiety, insomnia, even wonderful for headaches. It's also very good for digestion since it's antispasmodic, so it relaxes the stomach muscles and can be used for IBS and even Crohn's disease. And topically, it is a wonderful remedy for any kind of skin issues, wounds or burns. Both lavender and the honey are anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial. So this is an excellent remedy to keep in your first aid kit. It's also excellent for facial care, and I love to put both lavender and honey in my skincare remedies. It makes an excellent mask. The lavender, again, since it's antimicrobial, can be used for acne or any kind of skin issues. It's very calming and soothing, so it can be used for sensitive skin or even rosacea. And both the lavender and the honey are very good at healing the skin and promoting healthy vitality in the skin. So excellent for even aging skin and mature and dry skin. So wonderful remedy for that as well. We're going to go through a couple of different ways to make the honey, and it's very easy. There's only 2 ingredients. The first is the herb that you choose, and the second ingredient is the honey. I recommend using raw honey versus pasteurized honey. The only caution is that you do not give honey to children that are under 1 year of age. So to make the first version of the honey, we are going to take a ball jar or canning jar with a tight fitting lid and add our herb to it. This is dried lavender, but you certainly could use fresh lavender flower as well. You want to fill the jar about halfway up with the herb, and you can use any size jar that you want. Once we have the herb in there, we simply add the honey. I'm going to pour the honey over the herb, and I want to make sure that the herb is completely covered with the honey. I don't want any air to get into that herb. So I'm going to have to stir this really well in order to make sure that all of the herb is covered with the honey to help that herb extract. It does help if you've heated the honey a little bit beforehand, but you always want to make sure to never heat the honey over 110 degrees. That can actually harm the medicinal qualities of the herb. In particular, it can cook out those antimicrobial or antibacterial properties, and it also destroys the beneficial enzymes. So we want to make sure that anytime we're heating the honey, that we always want to make sure it's under 110 degrees. Now I'm going to add just a little bit more honey to make sure that we don't have any air touching the herb. And we're getting right up to the top of the jar there, so that's perfect. And we simply cover the herb and label it. I always label my preparations with what I've put in it and the date. And what you're going to do is let this sit in a sunny windowsill for about 4 weeks and let those medicinal properties extract into the honey. There is a shorter way to do this if you really want your herbal infused honey today. What you can do is put the herb and the honey in a pan, preferably a double boiler, but if you don't have one, that's okay. And put it on the stove top and heat it ever so gently for about 3 hours. Again, you don't want that heat to get above 110 degrees. You want to be very careful about turning it as low as you possibly can. Once that is ready, you can strain the herb out. And the same with the herb that you have put in the windowsill for 4 weeks. Once that is done, you can strain that as well. And here's how I like to strain the herb. I take a container that's large enough for the honey, and I put a strainer into the container. That's what the herb is going to go into. And I use a cheesecloth. This one I have folded over 4 times, which is quite a bit because the cheesecloth is fairly porous. And I want to make sure that I capture all of that herb. I don't want any herb going into the honey. And I certainly don't want to strain this a second time because it is kind of messy and it does take a while to strain. So what I like to do is to tip my jar. I take the cover off, tip the jar upside down, and just let it sit for the day. And that will slowly strain into the container. It does take a while, but it will happen. Once that is strained, then I can transfer the herbal infused honey to another jar with a tight fitting lid and store that in a cool place. I like to store it in my refrigerator. When you want to use your honey, you can simply take a teaspoonful or put it into your tea, and it really makes the tea taste wonderful. Another way to quickly and easily make an herbal infused honey that you can use right away is to use a dried powdered herb. This doesn't need to be strained out, so you can actually mix it right into the honey. So again, I'm taking a jar with a tight fitting lid, and this will be the jar that I'm actually going to store the honey in and use the honey from. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of the powdered lavender. Usually I would use 2 tablespoons for 1 cup of honey, but the lavender is really quite strong, so I'm only using 1 tablespoon here. And then I'm simply going to pour the honey over the herb and mix it very well. And this is one of my favorite remedies for burns, again, because it is antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and does help that skin heal very quickly.
Roses grow all over the world and have a rich history. Their beauty has captivated humans for centuries on many levels. We appreciate their adornment in our gardens and their intoxicating aromas, but roses really serve medicinal purposes as well. Roses can be prepared as medicine in many ways. However, the sweetness that roses impart is highlighted even more by making them into lovely herbal infused honeys. Before they even touch the tongue, the aroma is enough to make anyone feel greater joy and greater happiness. This is a wonderful remedy for children, although it's certainly for adults too. Roses are one of the safest remedies we have. They help to tonify, nourish, and build the whole system. Both rose petals and rose hips can be infused in honey. There are more varieties and cultivars of roses than most people can keep track of. Either select roses growing in the wild or those garden varieties that are red and aromatic. Just be sure they haven't been sprayed. Both rose petals and rose hips can be purchased as well. Rose petals and rose hips have an especial affinity for healing the heart, both physically and emotionally. They contain anthocyanins, which are high in antioxidants and helpful for many types of cardiovascular diseases, as well as cancer, diabetes, and cognitive decline. For emotional upsets, take a spoonful of rose petal infused honey or add a tablespoon to a nice calming tea such as chamomile. This can help uplift those that are grieving or for those who are experiencing a broken heart. Rose hips are particularly noted for use where there's immune deficiency and vitamin C deficiency. This is beneficial for colds, flu, fever, sore throat, or any kind of lung ailment. Externally, rose honey makes an exceptional facial mask for nourishing and toning the skin, as well as tightening the pores. Simply cover the skin and let it sit for 15 minutes before rinsing off. Lavender is a highly aromatic plant and one of the favorites of herbalists. Wild lavender is found growing in the Mediterranean and Northeast Africa, although it's quite easy to grow in many other parts of the world. If you prefer to purchase lavender to use for medicinal purposes, you can easily find it online or at local shops that supply herbs. It's the dried flower buds that are used medicinally. Most often you find the species Lavandula and Gustifolia. However, there are numerous garden varieties that can be used. Lavender has calming and soothing effects in many different ways. It's well known for relaxing and uplifting in times of stress, anxiety, and even for insomnia. Calming effects have been used to also help with agitation related to dementia. Those experiencing mild depression and are having a difficult time moving through it may also find lavender a beneficial remedy. It also makes an effective headache remedy. Lavender encourages healthy digestion. It's calming for stomach irritation due to stress and anxiety. Again, it's that very calming quality to it. And it can be helpful for lack of appetite. It's also antispasmodic, so it relaxes the stomach muscles, making it useful for irritable bowel syndrome and for Crohn's disease. A lavender honey is particularly calming in these situations. Externally, lavender honey is one of the best all-around remedies for any type of skin condition. It's been shown to be anti-inflammatory, antimicrobial, and to help relieve pain. So it's useful for minor infections, wounds, and even insect bites. Lavender, along with honey, can promote the healing of wounds. In particular, lavender honey is used on minor burns to decrease the pain and promote the repair of the skin. These properties also make lavender honey an excellent facial care mask for acne, as well as mature and aging skin. The calming and soothing attributes are helpful for red, irritated skin as well, such as rosacea. Lavender has no contraindications, side effects, or interactions with other drugs. It is a lovely, safe herb. Many of us have thyme growing in our gardens that we use for flavoring for our favorite dishes. But thyme is more than just a culinary herb. It's a great medicinal herb as well, and very safe with no contraindications or side effects. It can be used fresh or dried. And if you don't happen to have it growing in a pot or in your garden, it's easily purchased at any grocery store. It does grow wild in southern Europe and the Mediterranean, so it can be harvested if you have access to these areas. These wild plants often have a stronger flavor and medicinal quality. Thyme works by stimulating the thymus gland, which is responsible for the immune system. This makes it beneficial for colds and flu, helping to relieve sore throats, cough, and stiffness from chill. Thyme is a warming and drying herb, so it's most suited for cold and stagnant conditions, such as congestion in the lungs. It also has antispasmodic action to assist where there is that spastic coughing due to mucus that is just really difficult to expel. Since honey has its own benefits during cold and flu, it makes a perfect companion with thyme for this purpose. Thyme can be made into just about any other type of herbal preparation as well, such as teas or tinctures. Thyme can also be used as an antiseptic topically for acne, wounds, infections, and athlete's foot. Again, honey has similar healing properties, so it is one of the best ways to deliver the medicinal benefits of thyme externally.
Herbal syrups are a wonderful way to preserve concentrated teas. Not only do they taste wonderful, but there are so many different ways to use them. You can drizzle them over granola, oatmeal, fruit. You can even drizzle them over desserts and ice cream. I like to add them to beverages such as tea or lemonade, or even add them to club soda for a nice fizzy drink. You can also put them in sauces, marinades, and use them as salad dressing. So there's a lot of different ways to use these herbal syrups. We're going to be making a lemon verbena syrup today, which has a number of uses. It's a mild sedative, so it's very good for insomnia and anxiety. I also like to use it for colds. So this can be used for sinus congestion or even sore throats or fever. So very good for all different types of cold and flu symptoms. Some people even use it for digestive issues such as gas and colic and indigestion. And it's also been known to be helpful for joint pain. So a very valuable remedy to have on hand. To begin with, we are going to make a very strong decoction. So I'm going to put 2 cups of water into my pan. And to that, I'm going to add 1 ounce of herb. You can see this is quite a bit. I'm going to cover this up and simmer it on the lowest possible heat until the liquid reduces by half. So as I said, it's going to be a very strong, concentrated tea. Once that is done and reduced by half, I'm going to go ahead and strain out that herb. And I can simply do that into a container with a strainer such as this, and pour the herb in and go ahead and compost that herb. So we're going to reserve the liquid. To that liquid, we're going to add an equal amount of sweetener. And you can use a number of different kinds of sweeteners. You can use maple syrup, you can use glycerin, you can use brown sugar. And you want to stir, especially the brown sugar, stir that in while the liquid is still hot so that dissolves. Some people actually even cook that down to make the syrup even thicker. And if you like a real thick syrup, you can go ahead and do that and cook that down for about 20 or 30 minutes until it gets to the thickness that you like. But I really like to add honey, and I do not like to cook the honey because it has so many wonderful attributes to it that can be lost if the honey is heated above 110 degrees. There are wonderful beneficial enzymes and wonderful antibacterial properties that can be lost if you heat the honey. So I always wait till my liquid cools before adding the honey. And the honey does have so many wonderful benefits to it also that's what I really like to use for my syrups. Some people like to use 1 part of the liquid and 1 part of the sweetener. And I find that's actually very sweet. I like to use a little bit less sweetener. And when using the honey, I do like to use raw honey, not pasteurized honey, for the same reasons that I mentioned. The pasteurization does harm those beneficial qualities of the honey, and we don't want to do that. You also do not want to give raw honey or the syrup that contains the raw honey to children that are under 1 year of age. So once we have our concentrated tea and our honey mixed together, we can go ahead and put that into a jar for storage. And I like to use ball jars real similar to this that have a real tight fitting lid. And as always, be sure to label it with what you have put in it for the ingredients and the date. This will last for several weeks in the refrigerator. To create a syrup that is shelf stable, meaning that it doesn't need refrigeration and that will last quite a long time, you can add an alcohol. I like the taste of brandy with these syrups, but you could add any alcohol as long as it's 80 proof or higher. If you can find 100 proof, great. This one is 80 proof, which means that it's 40% alcohol. 100 proof means that it's 50% alcohol. So if we are adding the brandy or alcohol to preserve it, we want to make sure that we have at least 20% alcohol in our final preparation. So to do that, we will take an equal amount of syrup and add an equal amount of the alcohol to it, and that will successfully preserve your syrup. And either way, with or without the alcohol, I'm certain that you will find these syrups absolutely delicious and start incorporating them into your meals.
While lemon verbena is not one of the most common herbs used medicinally, it really should be. First, it has a wonderful lemon flavor and aroma with this hint of mintiness. It also has many benefits to our health. This is some of the best medicine that people want to take because it tastes good. Not all medicinal plants can claim that. Some are just downright disagreeable, but not lemon verbena. It's actually quite often used as a culinary herb made into sweet treats. This is why making a syrup from it is one of the best ways to consume it as medicine. It can, however, be made into other types of herbal preparations if you prefer. Lemon verbena was originally found in Peru, in Argentina, and in Chile. Now, a number of people grow it if they're in warmer climates. It's a woody bush about 10 feet tall. The botanical name, Aloysia citriodora, is sometimes referred to as Aloysia trophylla as well. You might see it both ways. And it really is quite easy to purchase this herb online. It's the leaves and sometimes the flowering tops that are used. That wonderful flavor and aroma of the leaves can still be detected once it's dried, unlike lemon balm, which quickly loses that quality. Interestingly, lemon verbena has some of the same attributes as lemon balm. It's a mild sedative to soothe nerves and reduce anxiety. Lemon verbena helps to bring a relaxing sense of calm. It can also be taken for insomnia and lethargy. For those experiencing mild depression, lemon verbena helps to lift the spirits. Lemon verbena's soothing qualities help in the digestive tract as well. It's also antispasmodic, therefore beneficial for any kind of abdominal discomfort that is cramping in nature. Use it in particular for colic, indigestion, gas, bloating. Some use it for joint pain as well. The only caution is that with long-term use, it may actually cause irritation to the gastrointestinal tract. Finally, this herb is good to have on hand for colds and flu to help with sinus congestion and sore throat. It's an especially important herb to use for fever. There's a long list of uses for poultices. They can be used for respiratory conditions, they can be used for wounds and cuts, enlarged glands, skin eruptions. They can be used for blood poisoning, burns, rashes, abscesses, tumors, cysts, wrinkles, insect bites, splinters, sore muscles, sprained ankles or other joints, and the list goes on. So you can see that this is really useful medicine. There are 3 different types of poultices, each with their own different purpose, and each is used slightly differently. There's the soothing poultice, the drawing poultice, and the heating poultice. Let's start with the soothing poultice first. This one you would use for those conditions such as inflammations or skin irritations, burns, or even sprains. To use a soothing poultice, it's best to use fresh herbs. So you're going to want to chop them real finely and mash them. This poultice and the others and the compresses that we'll be talking about in this video can be used either cold or hot, so we'll talk about that a little bit later on. To use this soothing poultice, press the chopped or mashed herbs gently onto the area it's affected so that it completely contacts the skin. You can place the herbs in a cloth if you like before putting them on the skin, especially for conditions where maybe the skin has been broken and you don't want that herb to stick to the open wound. But if the skin hasn't been broken, just go ahead and put the herbs right on the skin. Cover with a cheesecloth or a piece of cotton or some sort of non-synthetic cloth. Wool cloth makes a great covering, especially if you're going to be applying heat to the area. You can also put some plastic over the area, but only for short term. You do want that area to breathe. For this kind of soothing poultice, you'd like to reapply the new poultice every 20 minutes or so. The next type of poultice is a drawing poultice, where it draws material out of the skin. This is really great for splinters, stingers, tick heads, pimples for acne, or any kind of pus from an infection. A drawing poultice works really well. The best type of poultice that I can think of for drawing out is clay. It really works the best. You'll want to make sure that you use a good quality clay that is sterilized. And just mix that, or you can even use, there are a number of different herbs that are wonderful for this as well. Just mix that with a little cold water to make into a paste and just spread over the skin and cover that. You're going to want to leave that on for about 10 minutes or so after it is already dried, and then rinse it off. One of the most beloved poultices by herbalists is the plantain poultice. It's beloved because it grows everywhere, and we can usually find it when we're outdoors, and that is when we get these splinters or stingers or have a lot of these issues that require a drawing poultice. Plantain is one of the best herbs for drawing things out of the skin. So if you're out and you get stung, simply look around for some plantain if you know how to identify it. And make sure that you do positively identify it. You can look in some really great guidebooks or take one of my courses on backyard medicine to know what plantain looks like and how to use it. You can see me using it here, and I'm simply just chewing on it a little bit and then placing it directly on my skin. It works wonders. It's easy to find and very effective. Plantain also really has some very drying and disinfecting qualities to it, so it makes it an ideal remedy for cuts that have a lot of debris in them and you're having a hard time getting the debris out of the wound. Plantain will do a really great job for you. The last type of poultice I'd like to talk about is a heating poultice. This isn't temperature heat, but this is herb heat, such as mustard is a real great heating poultice, or even cayenne. You can imagine how hot that can be. This increases circulation to an area. Heating poultices are also really good for relaxing muscles. Heating poultices you have to be very careful about, especially if you're using something such as mustard or cayenne. You're going to want to dilute that a little bit with 1 part of the ground herb to 3 parts of a flower. And the flours that I like to use are either oat flour, and this is the type of baking flour, not the pretty petaled flour that we're talking about. This is like a baking flour that you would use, and I really like oat flour or barley flour. If you use wheat flour that you use for making bread, it can get really gooey and sticky and hard to remove. So I really prefer some of the others like the oat flour or the barley flour. You simply make this into a paste and spread that over the area that's affected. This is one of my favorite poultices for loosening up respiratory congestion when you're just not able to cough up and expel that phlegm from a cold. The mustard works really good for that, as well as cayenne and even onion. If you can just chop up some onion real fine and cook that and mash that up with some flour and apply it to the chest area. You'll want to replace this every 20 minutes or so. Some herbalists say that you can reuse your poultices. Some say that you definitely should not reuse your poultice. If you can make fresh, great. If you don't have that much material on hand, that's all right. The only poultice that you do not want to reuse, which everyone agrees on, is the drawing poultice because it will have those impurities in it. Next, let's talk about herbal compresses. Herbal compresses are basically a cotton cloth that is soaked in an herbal preparation. Herbal preparations can be a dilute tincture, they can be in an herbal infused oil, they can be a strong cup of herbal tea or decoction of a real strong tea. And this is applied to the skin and held in place. These compresses can be used over and over again by re-soaking, unless it is for a drawing situation where you're drawing out some toxins or some sort of debris or something from the skin, then you wouldn't want to reuse those. Compresses have a number of different uses. They can be used for localized issues with the skin, such as wounds, bruises, insect bites, and stings. They can also be used for inflammatory conditions, and they can be used for swollen lymph, even headaches. And another really great use for compresses is for sprains or any tenderness to muscles, joints, tendons, even a sore throat. So you can see there are a lot of different uses for compresses. The simplest application of a compress would be simply taking tea bags of chamomile, for example, and soaking them in water and placing them on sore eyes. You could also soak a cotton cloth in St. John's wort oil, for example, and place that onto some damaged nerve tissue or sore muscles or even some sort of traumatic injury. There are all different kinds of ways that you can use these compresses. You want to change them out every few minutes, and you want to continue with that process until the tissues or the wounded area feels better or it's been healed. Whether you're using a healing poultice or an herbal compress, there are some basic guidelines whether to use those cold or hot. Generally, you want to use a cold herbal compress or poultice in the first 24 to 48 hours after a wound or an accident or a pain. Simply place your poultice or compress in the freezer for a few minutes until that's nice and chilled, and then apply it to the area. This will help lessen the blood flow to the area and reduce inflammation. This is also really good for a headache or anytime there's swelling or tenderness and you want that to go down. Once that has gone down, then you can start to apply heat to the area, and this will really help to soothe and heal the area. Warming is also really drawing, and it helps pull out impurities, and it also is really very relaxing. And if it's a really hot compress or a really hot poultice, that'll really help to open up areas of congestion, such as when there's a lot of phlegm in the respiratory area that just isn't moving. So hopefully this helps you understand how to use either hot or cold compresses or poultices. So many of you have asked about combining herbs together in teas or in tinctures. The answer is absolutely yes, you can. This is a bit more advanced, but I've decided to share the information with you here so that you can start thinking about and experimenting with combining herbs, or what I like to call formulation. Up to this point, we've been talking about making herbal medicines with single herbs, and this is the best way to start. In fact, this is how I usually make my herbal tinctures and teas, and it's how many herbalists make their tinctures and teas as well, even the most experienced herbalists. However, there might be times when you want to use multiple herbs for a specific formula. Formulating doesn't mean simply combining all of the herbs you can think of for a particular purpose, such as a cough, for example. It means combining herbs that act synergistically together and that are supportive of each other. There are 3 different categories of plants that go into a formula, and each has its own particular purpose. The first category of plants are the primary herbs, and these are the herbs that are specific to address a particular issue. They're the ones that you would think of normally for using if you were going to be using a single herb, for example. They would be the first ones that you would go to. And this in a formula would comprise about 70 to 80% of the formula. So it's most of what you're going to be using. And it's providing the most important function that you're looking for. There's another category of herbs, which are the supportive herbs. These are herbs that provide support to the body and help it cope with whatever condition that you're dealing with. So this is the second part of the formula. These herbs really help to tonify and nourish the part of the body that is needing help. And it's good to make these herbs roughly about 10 to 20% of the formula. And then finally, the third category. These are our activating herbs. So they really get things moving. They help to eliminate what's not wanted in the system. And this could include stimulant herbs. It would include those diuretics or laxatives, or even the diaphoretics, which help to sweat out a virus, for example. They open the pores so toxins can be sweat out. And you want to make these activating herbs 10 to 15% of the formula. As you learn more and more about medicinal plants, start thinking about how they may fit into each one of these categories. And be aware that an herb may fall into different categories depending on the particular use. An example would be ginger. So, this could be one of the primary herbs or one of those specific herbs if you're making a formula for nausea, let's say. Or perhaps you're making a formula for circulation or to get the digestion moving, then ginger may actually fit into that third category and be more of an activating herb. So you can see how it can play different parts depending on what you're looking for it to do. You can also use a single herb for each one of the three categories, or you can use a couple of herbs in each of the categories. And just be sure not to get too carried away with adding too many herbs. You want to keep these fairly simple. So don't be adding any more than 5 or 6 or 7 herbs into a formula. Then it just really gets too confusing. And if it isn't working, it's just really hard to find out what part of the formula is not functioning the way you want it to. And another note is that if you are making formulas that are intended to be used in teas, it's best not to mix the aerial parts of the plant, which would be the flowers and the leaves, along with the roots and barks, or even like seeds and nuts. And the reason for this is because the flowers and the leaves that we talked about in the tea section are infused so that you are not boiling those parts of the plants. You're simply pouring hot boiling water over those and then letting them infuse. Whereas the barks and roots and nuts and seeds are a little harder to extract, and those you actually do want to boil. So you can see that it would be really hard to make a formula which combine both of these. If you really do want to make a formula which does combine some of these, keep them separate and then just process them each a little differently. Just first do your infusion, do your decoction, and then add them back together again. I would also like to mention that some herbalists prefer to combine all of the herbs together into a single tincture or a single formula, thinking that the herbs synergize with each other better that way. This also provides ease of use. So the tincture is just already made up and combined for the condition, and it's just ready to go. And in fact, there are a number of tincture and tea combinations on the market today that are made by very respectable manufacturers, and they make it really easy for you to use. A few of the brands that I really respect are Herb Farm, and also Traditional Medicinals, which makes teas. Herb Farm makes the tinctures. And there are even some smaller homegrown companies that I love that are doing this as well. So you can just go and buy your anxiety formula. It's already there formulated for you and very easy, simple to take. On the other hand, some herbalists prefer to tincture the herbs separately and then combine them afterwards. In this way, you can mix and match the formula depending on the particular case, or you can change it up as the disease progresses. An example would be if you're making a cold care formula. You'd want an herb with antibacterial or antiviral properties, as well as something to support the acute symptoms, such as a sore throat or runny nose or a cough, for example. So a cold might progress from a sore throat for the first few days, so you might want something that's very soothing to the throat. And as it progresses into more of a running nose, you might want something a little bit more astringent. And then as it progresses into a cough, you might want to use even a different herb for that. And to get really specific, let's say the cough could be due to a lot of mucus congestion in the lungs, or let's say it could even be a very dry, spastic cough. You would use different herbs for either one of these. So, for a lot of mucus congestion in the lungs, where there's a lot of moisture, you'd want, as I said, a more astringent herb for that that helps dry that out. Or let's say you had that really dry, spastic cough that was just really not very controllable. You'd want something that was more soothing or antispasmodic to really help control that cough. So you can see here how keeping your herbs separate can really help you hone in with very specific remedies. And I know I'm getting a bit advanced here, but I do want you to start thinking about how these herbs work energetically in the body, not just that they're used for cough, but what are they doing in order to help control that cough or help resolve whatever the condition is. Whether you decide to work with individual herbs or combine them in either of the two ways that I've just discussed, in the end, each herbalist really seems to find the way that works best for them. Here are some examples of herbal formulations with details of what is included in the formulation and, more importantly, why they're included. The first example is going to be a heart tonic formula. And tonic formulas help specific organs or bodily systems to function more efficiently and to bring the body back into balance. So, this heart tonic formula is a really good one to know and a good example to start with. In the primary herb category, we'll include two herbs here, and they both support heart health specifically. And the first one is hawthorn, and it really belongs in all types of formulas for heart health. It is one of the best herbs that I can think of for all different kinds of reasons. It's restorative to the heart, and it really is well known and respected. It's often the berries that are used, however, the leaves and the flowers are used as well. In this formula, we're going to be adding it as the majority of the formula. So I'm going to be putting it in here at 60% of the formula. But we still have a little bit more room for another herb. So we're also going to add in motherwort, which is another heart tonic that helps to strengthen the heart. And it's used for heart irregularity and hypertension. So we're going to be putting this in at 15%. So you can see that we have 75% of our formula now as those primary herbs. In the next category, we are going to be adding Solomon seal, which is supportive and relaxing to the heart. So it really fills this role of being support in the formula. It's a very nourishing herb. Matthew Wood, who is my dear friend, teacher, and mentor, has some really excellent information on using Solomon seal for heart issues. And what he does is add 1 part of the Solomon seal to 7 parts of the hawthorn. And Matthew is one of those who almost always works with single herbs. This is one of the few cases where I actually see him mixing herbs, so that's what he does. But in this case, we're going to be making it into an overall formula. So the Solomon seal, we're going to be adding it at 15%. So we have 10% left of our formula for that third category. And one of the best herbs for this, for any kind of heart tonic and to get things really activated, would be cayenne. Cayenne really stimulates the blood flow and it increases circulation. So it really is an appropriate herb to act as the activator in this formula. So here we have a complete 100%, all of these herbs really supporting the function and the efficiency of the heart. Our next example formula is going to be for digestive health. And for the primary herbs, we're going to be looking at those bitter herbs. And bitter herbs promote good digestion in a number of ways. They help in the digestion of proteins and fats. They're also beneficial for digestive issues due to overwork, to overeating, lack of exercise, or even weakness due to infections. You would take bitter herbs for cases of irritable bowel syndrome and constipation. So you can see there's a lot of different uses for this formula, so I thought it would be another good example for us to take a look at. Let's start with the primary category of herbs. And artichoke leaf is going to be the one that we're going to use in the highest concentration in this formula. It's one of the best known and most often used bitters. So we're going to add it at 60%. Then we're going to add a 10% of gentian root, which is also a bitter that stimulates the flow of the digestive juices, but it's also one of the strongest bitters, so we're not going to be adding as much of it. But it is widely respected for its effectiveness, so we do want to include it in the formula. Then in the supportive herb category, we have two wonderful herbs for this for a number of different reasons. 10% each of fennel and cardamom. They are both digestive promoting herbs that are warming to the system, and that's perfect in this formula because they help to counteract the cooling action of the bitter herbs. Bitter herbs tend to be kind of cool on the system, so by adding these warming herbs, we bring that back into balance. So these herbs are very supporting and balancing in the formula. And both of these herbs are also what we call carminative herbs, and that they help to reduce the gas and bloating in the system. Then finally, we are going to be adding our activating herb, which is ginger, and it really gets things moving in the digestive tract, and it also stimulates the digestion and helps with elimination. So we're going to be putting that in at 10%. So again, you can see our full 100% of herbs here that are all working in conjunction with each other and all supporting their particular category. While herbalism is generally very safe, here are a few cautionary words. First of all, many herbs are not advised during pregnancy or breastfeeding. There are some herbs, such as raspberry leaf, that are exceptional during pregnancy and breastfeeding. However, this is an important time to limit many consumptions. So if you are interested in taking any herbs, then you'll want to run that by your doctor or your midwife or an herbalist or someone that specializes in herbs. Also, on a rare occasion, there can be hypersensitivity or allergic reactions in some people of even the most safest herbs. Those who are obviously more sensitive, such as the very old, very young, very thin, should start out with small dosages and gradually increase. If an herb causes any discomfort or any unwanted effects, they should be discontinued right away. Another cautionary note is regarding herb-drug interactions. Herbs can increase the effect of certain pharmaceutical drugs. An example would be the herb red clover, which thins blood very slightly, but you would not want to take it with the blood-thinning warfarin, for example. Another example would be St. John's wort, which is a wonderful herb, but it causes the liver to break down the pharmaceutical more quickly, therefore making them less effective. You want to be sure to tell your doctor of any herbs you're taking before being prescribed a pharmaceutical. Unfortunately, there are very few doctors that know anything about herbal remedies, so it's worth consulting an herbal specialist or an herbalist if you are taking any kind of prescription. Finally, I can't stress enough how important it is to positively identify any plant you wish to harvest in the wild. Although few and far between, there are toxic plants and even a few deadly ones. Know your plants really well. Attend herb walks in your area, reference guidebooks, and learn whatever you can from reputable sources. Follow these simple guidelines to herbal safety, and you will find the best success with your herbal medicines. When making your herbal medicine, it's really important to use only the best quality herbs that you can find available. You can either wild harvest them yourself, which is called wild crafting, which we'll be talking about, or you can purchase them. Just be sure to purchase them from a good quality supplier. When you receive your herbs, you should check them to make sure that they are really quality. And by quality, I mean that they should look and taste and smell almost exactly like they do when the herbs are fresh. So the color should be really rich. If it's a green leafy herb, then the product should look nice and rich in green, real vivid. Or if it was flowers that you've purchased, you want to make sure that they are really bright and in really similar color as the actual plant growing in the wild. The smell should also be pretty strong, not necessarily always a good smell because not all herbs always smell good, but it should smell like the plant does. Some plants just smell green. Others can be very aromatic, some even pretty exotic. So you want to make sure there's just some sort of aroma to the plant. You can also taste the herbs that you've purchased. And just as not all herbs smell good, not all herbs taste good. However, they should taste really potent and fresh and vital. And finally, good quality herbs should be effective. They should work, and if they are not working, check the quality first. It could just be because the wrong remedy was selected, but I always suspect quality at the beginning. You can use this sense of color and smell and taste and effectiveness to also determine the shelf life of your plants. So if the dried plants no longer have really good vivid color or good aroma or really fresh, vital, potent taste to them, then you know they're past their shelf life and it might be better to simply compost them. Plants can lose their quality fairly quickly with a few different conditions. They can lose quality with heat, with light, with moisture, and with air. So you want to make sure that once you receive your herbs, or if you have wildcrafted your own herbs and if you dried them yourself, no matter what, you're going to want to store them in a really tight sealed glass jar. You could skimp and use plastic bags, Ziploc plastic bags, but herbalists tend to really prefer glass jars. I like to purchase canning jars, or they're sometimes called ball jars. They are clear, so it doesn't keep out the light. If you're going to be storing in these types of clear glass jars, then you want to make sure that you're storing the herbs in a dark closet or someplace that's really dark, doesn't have a lot of light. You can also purchase dark glass to store your herbs in, which is really ideal because then you really can store them just about anywhere. I always caution about keeping your herbs stored in the kitchen. A lot of people keep even their culinary herbs stored right next to where they're cooking, so it's near their stovetop or their oven. And this introduces a lot of heat, and this can degrade the quality of your herbs more quickly than you'd like. So make sure there's some place that is a little bit cooler. Make sure they're not getting any air on the herbs or any moisture, and this will really help extend the quality of your herbs. And finally, make sure that you label everything, even your dried herbs. It's one thing to purchase your own herbs from a reputable source, but quite another to harvest, or what is called wildcrafting your own herbs. This will give you the highest quality herbs you could possibly get. It's like having a garden in your backyard versus going to the grocery store. As we've discussed, it goes without saying you must absolutely be sure of what you are harvesting and have positive identification. The point of this lesson is to discuss sustainable harvesting. As herbalism gains popularity, it's more and more likely that herbs will be over-harvested. Herbal harvesting is not the only contribution to the risk of losing plant species. There are actually far greater reasons why we are rapidly losing entire populations of plants. This would include habitat loss, development, deer predation or other animal predation, climate change, and even the extreme overharvesting by large pharmaceutical corporations. They are one of the primary contributors to the decrease in availability of our most cherished plants. We as herbalists have to make sure we are not also contributing to the demise of our most valuable plants. With a bit of education, we can be conscientious about how much we harvest. First, there are certain plants that we should just never harvest, or if so, only very rarely for very specific reasons. There's an amazing organization called United Plant Savers that teaches about these at-risk plants. Please check out their website to get yourself acquainted with which plants are at risk and which are to watch and what you can do to help be a good steward for the plants. I also encourage you to grow your own. You do not always have to harvest from the wild. Many medicinal plants are easily grown in many gardens. It's a great opportunity to initially get to know the plants through the seasons and recognize them at any stage of growth. If you do harvest from the wild, only take a small amount. Consider what it will take for the remaining populations of plants to be vital and healthy. Also, remember, there may be others that are also harvesting in the same area. Be extra careful when harvesting roots as they take the entire life of the plant. It's much more sustainable to harvest a few leaves and a few flowers from multiple plants. Some talk about harvesting 25% of the plants in a given area, some say 10%. Both numbers could be too high if the given plant population is at risk. Remember that just because there may be numerous plants in your area, they may be scarce or not even found elsewhere. Let's all do what we can to make sure the plants are there for future generations to come. Let's talk a bit about drying your own herbs. You can dry herbs that you've harvested from your garden that you've grown yourself, or you can wildcraft, which is harvesting plants from the wild. In either case, you're going to want to be careful about how you dry your herbs. You want to end up with a good quality herb, which we talk about a little bit later in this course. The herbs should have vibrant color once they're dried. They should have a good aroma, good flavor, and be very effective once they're dried. To ensure that you have this quality, you're going to want to dry your herbs in a shady place. So you want to make sure that there is no sun or bright light shining on the herbs. This is one of the ways that the herbs can degrade fairly quickly. Another way is with moisture. So you're going to want to make sure that you dry those herbs away from morning dew or anywhere where it could rain on them. So they're going to have to be covered up very well. And it also helps to dry the herbs a little more quickly if there's good air ventilation. If they're in a stuffy, enclosed place, they could possibly tend to mold, and you don't want that to happen. To begin with, you want to make sure that you're properly identifying the plants. We do talk about safety in this course. There are some plants that could be toxic and very few plants that are actually even deadly. But when you're wildcrafting or harvesting out in the wild, you want to make sure that the plants are actually what you want to be harvesting. There are also some look-alike plants. So there might be several plants that are very similar, but they might have slightly different medicinal action. So be sure to know your plants really well. Go on herb walks in your area, purchase some very good quality herb books, learn from really reputable sources anytime you can. I'm going to show you two different ways that I dry plants. One is if I have just a very small quantity of plant material to dry, and the other is if I have a larger quantity of plants. The first way I'll show you is for harvesting yarrow leaves. When I've only harvested a very small quantity, I don't need very much. I'm going to be harvesting this yarrow and drying it for my first aid kit. It's one of my favorite remedies for bleeding. If there's a cut or any kind of wounds that's bleeding, I put some ground up dried yarrow on it and it just stops the bleeding right away. I actually like it better than Band-Aids. I have a lot of really great success with it, so I want to make sure it's always in my first aid kit. Since I've only harvested a few leaves here, I'm simply just placing the leaves on a board, and I'm going to put that in a dry, shady place where there's a lot of ventilation. And I'm just going to let that sit for about a week. The yarrow tends to dry fairly quickly. In fact, sometimes if the conditions are right, it will dry even more quickly than that. To determine if the herbs are properly dried and ready for storage, I simply snap them, and they should snap separately very easily and without much effort at all. Once my yarrow leaf is properly dried, I grind it up in a mortar and pestle to turn that into a powder. And I simply store that in metal tins and put that right in my first aid kit. Of course, I do label it with what's in there before I store it, just to make sure I don't confuse it with any other herbs. Again, this is a wonderful bleeding remedy and should really be in every first aid kit. The next herb that I'm going to dry is horsetail. And I do like to harvest this one in larger quantities because I do make tea with it for about 6 months to a year. The herb doesn't tend to last too much longer than that, but I do make tea with it frequently, so I'm going to gather quite a large supply for myself. You can see me harvesting it here in the wild. This is quite a large population of plants, so I'm confident that I'm able to take the amount of plants that I will need to last me for the next 6 to 12 months. I'm also harvesting on my own land so that I know that it's ethical and that I have permission. You always want to make sure that you are harvesting on land that is not prohibited. So many state and national parks and provincial parks do not allow you to harvest, or private landowners sometimes don't want you to harvest as well. So make sure you always get permission. When I'm done harvesting here, you will not be able to tell that I took any plants from this area at all, which is very sustainable. Since I do not have a professional hoop house to dry my plants in, I have devised a way that's very easy for me to successfully dry my herbs. I simply take a clothes rack and lay it on its side, place a screen on top of that, and then layer my herbs in one single layer so that they're not overlapping. This allows plenty of airflow through the herbs, so I do not have any problems with molding or any kind of moisture issues. So I will let these herbs sit. The horsetail does take a little bit longer to dry. I find that it's usually about 2 weeks before I get a real good snap out of it, before I'm real confident that it's dry and ready for storage. So I'll make sure that this is in a covered place so there's no sun or light getting on it. There's plenty of air and dry as well. Roots can be a little trickier to dry because they're so dense and it really takes much longer for them to dry. You can help the process by either shaving them or grinding them or cutting them up real finely. If you leave the herbs whole and they do dry successfully, you're going to have a hard time cutting them afterwards. They're just going to be too tough. So make sure you prepare your herbs before the drying process. Once your herbs are dry, you're going to want to store them properly. Glass jars work really well, canning jars or ball jars. Make sure that they have a tight-fitting lid, and you're going to want to place those herbs in a cool, dark place. This will help them last for much longer.
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. In this video, I'll be showing you what I think are some of the top herbal books for beginners.
The first book I'd like to recommend is by far the one I reach for most. It's Family Herbal by Rosemary Gladstar. Rosemary is, as James Duke states in the foreword, the driving force behind the herbal movement. And she is for so many reasons. She has pure joy for the subject, and her enthusiasm for sharing her knowledge shows throughout the book. It's loaded with concepts, recipes, how-tos, that are very approachable and easy to understand. It's so inspiring to take the teachings of this book and make them a part of everyday life. Rosemary has been the biggest influence in how I use herbs in my everyday life and how I teach my students. If you could purchase only one book, this would be the one. The second book I would recommend is Holistic Herbal by David Hoffman. David is an extremely knowledgeable herbalist with an impressive background both in teaching and practicing herbalism. This book is a wealth of information, yet, just like Rosemary's book, it's approachable and easy to understand. It's a valuable resource for herbalism for the home, meaning caring for yourself and family, and yet it also dives into herbalism a step further. He goes into the different body systems first with an overview, and then he writes about groups of herbs and how they work for the particular bodily systems. He then goes into various conditions and the herbs used for those conditions. This really provides a comprehensive understanding of why you're using the herbs for particular ailments. This is the only book I know of for making that so clearly understood. The second half of the book is a list of herbs, and for each herb, the part used, collection, constituents, actions, indications, and preparation and dosage. This book is a wealth of information. This next book is one that should be on every herbalist shelf who has an interest in making herbal medicine. It goes into medicine making detail like no other book. The types of preparations included in the book include making tinctures, vinegar extracts, herbal glycerites, teas, syrups, oils, salves, poultices, compresses, just about any type of preparation you'd be interested in. For each type of herbal preparation, he talks about what it is, how and when you would use that particular type of preparation. And for those of you who like precision and measurements, you'll love this book. He shows you the math and makes it easy to understand. The last part of the book goes into detail of making preparations for specific herbs. It's really invaluable information. The next book is Herbs, Partners in Life by Adele Dawson. She's no longer living today, but was certainly an adored herbalist in her day. You can tell she really had a lovely relationship with the plants. If you want to get to know medicinal plants, this is a good beginner's book. It's especially suited for those that are interested in growing medicinal plants or even wildcrafting, which is harvesting from the wild. This book is broken down by seasons, which really gives you a feel for which herbs are gathered and used, even as food, at different times of the year. Finally, I'd like to recommend a book by James Duke titled The Green Pharmacy. This book is arranged alphabetically by medical condition. These are common conditions that would commonly be experienced in any household. You can simply look up the condition, read about what it is, then go to the herbs for that particular condition. It's also written by one of the leading authorities on medicinal herbs. His accolades are too lengthy for me to go into here, but be sure to look him up. This book, one of his many, is truly a trustworthy and valuable resource. These books I've shown you offer a great variety of information without much duplication. They will make a great start to an herbal library or even a nicely rounded collection for the beginning herbalist. I sometimes hear information about herbs that takes me by surprise, with statements that a particular herb does not work or that it's likely unsafe. And when I hear this about herbs that have been used for many, sometimes even thousands of years with great success and little or no adverse reports, I have to ask, where did this information come from? More often than not, the information stems from a questionable online resource. Sadly, these questionable reports make their way around the internet pretty quickly without any sort of controls. Sometimes it seems there is so much conflicting information rolling around out there, you want to throw your arms up in the air and say, I don't know. So, for this reason, I wanted to briefly share with you some of the reliable, quality resources so that you can weed your way through to the facts when you need to. To begin with, there are many medical journals available to us that offer valid scientific studies in all forms of treatment. And this is drugs, supplements, and herbs. When you're looking at that scientific research, there are some important considerations, and I'll just go through these real quickly. First of all, take a look at who the author or authors are. What are their qualifications? And more importantly, is there any conflict of interest, such as industry advocate or industry biased? And this can be any industry, including drug, supplement, or even the herbal industry. So you want to know who is writing this and could the research be slanted in their favor. Secondly, you want to look at the quality of the study. So this would be sample size. If the sample size is very small, that's not as reliable as a study that has a very large sample size. You also want to look to see if the study was placebo controlled, if it was randomized, and if it was double blind. And you can look into all of those terms if you want to. You don't necessarily have to. But really importantly is you also want to look at the dosage that was used in the study and the length of the study. Echinacea has been one of those very controversial herbs because a lot of the studies that show that it didn't work either didn't have the appropriate dosage or weren't used for long enough. So that has really caused a lot of problems for that herb. So you want to be sure that you take a look at that. Also, you want to see if the study was performed on humans or was it performed on animals. A lot of these studies are performed on rabbits. Sadly, a lot of are performed on rats is actually more common, but that doesn't mean that that translates to humans. Then finally, you want to look for, if you can find it, a meta-analysis. And what a meta-analysis is a combination of several different studies that are all pooled together to get a more accurate finding. So ideally, you try to look for those when you can. A great repository for these journal articles or these scientific studies is the National Institute of Health has an online resource and it's called PubMed. And you can go there, you don't have to log in or anything. It's free to the public to go research and reference. And it includes articles from quite a variety of medical journals. So you simply search for the condition or the remedy that you're interested in. And while this is a great resource for even for herbal information, there is some limit to the amount of study conducted on plants since most of the research is geared towards understanding plants or plant constituents that can eventually lead to a profitable situation. And this is understandable since research can be quite costly to conduct. So a lot of the researchers are performing these studies for some sort of outcome that will lead to a profit. So just keep that in mind. However, it is still often very valuable, and I do find a lot of good information there. One other resource that is highly reliable and entirely focused on the plants is the German Commission monographs, which provide a great deal of data on each plant. This is really valuable information. You can find these on the American Botanical Council website. This website is one of the best resources I can think of for factual, well-researched herbal information. I highly recommend joining their membership if you're serious about your botanical studies. Here is their mission statement. Provide education using science-based and traditional information to promote responsible use of herbal medicine, serving the public, researchers, educators, healthcare professionals, industry, and media. I would include in that students as well. So finally, I will add that there are many greatly qualified herbalists who have become experts in their field. These are clinical herbalists with many years of empirical evidence and case studies and are probably our best source of information. So be sure to seek them out when you can. Many of them have very good quality books on the subject, and even those that have long passed and are no longer with us have left us with valuable texts that will live on for our use and for reliable reference materials. I couldn't end this conversation without leaving you with one word of caution about online resources. Some of them look very official and look like they are quality, reliable information. However, I will caution you that there is a great deal of bias, so probably not the best source of information. And I will actually name one by name, but there are a number of very similar websites. One is called WebMD, and it is written by physicians, so it's an excellent resource for types and causes of diseases. So you can certainly take a look at the website for that. I will mention that it is supported by the pharmaceutical industry. There's a clear bias, as you can see in the advertising all over the website, and treatment recommendations towards manufactured drugs, which is fine if that's the route you want to go. However, they often state that natural remedies are possibly unsafe or do not work. And every time I take a look at this, I cannot find any citations to scientific research to back up these vague claims, and there is never an author attributed to these claims that could be contacted for the source of information. So I do find this very concerning. So be careful when taking a look at some of those websites and just keep that biased in mind that it might not be the best source of information for you. So you're better off sticking with the resources that I've mentioned previously.